call the study session to order. Director Workman.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. It's nice to be before you without a land use application that has a bunch of folks in the audience, so I'll just start with that. We are here at the study session to talk about housing legislation that was approved by the state legislature last year and signed into law by Governor Polis. I want to reiterate that this will not be the only time that council will have the opportunity to discuss the topic. In 2 weeks, there's an executive session to discuss the legal ramifications of this legislation, and this topic is on the council agenda for your retreat on March 4th. Discussion this evening is to provide background information on this legislation in preparation for future discussions.
So just jump in there for a second and say my plan, I mean, depending on how the timing is, my plan is not to have a lot of discussion tonight. I think those other forums will be important discussion opportunities. This is mostly a receiving information, ask questions, et cetera.
Yes. There are 4 specific bills that we will talk about. All of these bills are an encroachment into the Home Rule Authority, which the state asserts they're allowed to do since this is a matter of statewide interest. However, I have my suspicions that that will ultimately need to be determined by a court. Furthermore, none of these bills indicate how the state intends to enforce the legislation.
Sorry, can I jump in there too?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the benefit of everyone, in the Colorado State Constitution, home rule municipalities are granted pretty broad control over anything that is considered of local concern. And the state is given full authority over things that are a matter of statewide concern. When it becomes mixed state and local concern, the state can create sort of baselines, and cities are, home rule municipalities are welcome to be more specific or more stringent requirements, but not less, right? And I think what Director Workman just said was that the state legislature just stating in a bill that something is a matter of mixed state and local control does not necessarily make it so.
Particularly when this legislation, most of this legislation does not apply statewide. It applies to the Front Range.
So there are quite a few legal arguments around that, but what basically happened was the legislature just said, housing's a matter of statewide concern, so we're going to preempt your local authority. And I think there's some very legitimate questions as to whether that's legal or not.
And I might add that our Attorney General last week got done saying he is going to push back strongly on the federal government if they try to encroach on the state's ability to control their own land. Make a note.
So,
Yes.
anyway, please continue.
Well, just for further context, right, 2 years ago, the state tried very similar legislation and included a lot of mountain communities, and there was so much pushback against it that ultimately that legislation didn't end up going through. And so in 24, they came in with these individual ones that largely don't apply to mountain communities. So. The first one we'll talk about is pretty straightforward. It's probably the shortest and easiest one to understand. And these are in no particular order. They're just numerically based on the House designation first. So the first one essentially says that local governments cannot regulate the number of people that live together based on their familial status. We currently have language in our code that says that no more than 3 unrelated people can live in a single dwelling unit. There are some exceptions for domestic employees or group homes or things of that nature, but the general rule of thumb is more than 3 is not currently allowed by our code.
Can I just ask a question? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Do HOA rules, how do those fit in with the citywide regulations?
So whether it's this type of regulation or any other type of HOA regulation, those are separate private covenants that a property owner enters into when they purchase that property. So the city doesn't enforce HOA standards. We certainly let folks know that there's HOAs out there and they need to abide by all those requirements, all that sort of stuff.
So just to follow up, so if the HOA had a restriction along these lines, would that take precedence over?
I think that's a very interesting legal question because the legislation says that not only does this apply to local governments, it also preempts HOA covenants.
In all of these things that Director Workman's going to present, the state has also prohibited HOAs from doing the same, which is yet another legal question, whether the state actually has the authority to interfere in a private agreement between an HOA and a private landowner. Yes, so, yeah, that's like note number 2.
So, no, to that point, whether it's an occupancy standard like this or whether or not they allow accessory dwelling units, the state says we preempt you, you can't tell them they can't do that. So. The second legislation is the accessory dwelling unit legislation. And again, these are bullet point summaries of layers of legislation, and so this certainly isn't comprehensive. I want to be able to go through, hit some highlights so that we can come back and have, I guess, a deeper discussion. So this is a very Cliff Notes version of what the bill says. But for ADUs, essentially, this city has to allow through an administrative process, so we're not allowed to require a public hearing process. We're required to allow ADUs anywhere that we would allow a single-family home. Now, the limit on that is anywhere between 500 and 800 square feet, but again, that has to be allowed anywhere we allow a single-family home. We can impose some restrictions on those, but we can't impose any restriction that is greater than what we would otherwise apply to a similar detached structure. For example, we can't apply stricter setback requirements. We can't require stricter design requirements. We can't require stricter building requirements. So however we treat any other accessory structure is how we have to treat an accessory dwelling unit. Here in Cherry Hills Village, you may or may not know, we do allow for a guest house. We allow for guest houses in the R1 and R2 zone district. If they're attached, the maximum square footage they're allowed to be is either 900 square feet or 25% of the floor area of the home and that area designated as a guest house.
Just remind us R1, R2 for newbies.
I'm sorry?
R1, just to remind what R1 and R2 mean for.
Okay. The R1 and R2 are two of our residential zone districts. The R1 is the largest residential zone district here in the city. It has a minimum lot size of 2.5 acres. And R2 is our second largest, and I believe the minimum lot size in the R2 is 2 acres, if I'm not mistaken. But the distinction really is
An acre,
acre and a quarter. Oh, one and a half. That's right, because R3 is 1. That's right. Yeah. So here in Cherry Hills Village, the residential zoning designation, we only allow the single-family detached homes. The distinction between the different zone districts is the minimum lot size that's required within that zone district.
So in a lot of, we have R1 through R5. R5 is my neighborhood, basically. Those are the smallest zone lots. And then we also have a 3A thrown in there. A lot of other cities, R1 means single-family residential. R2 means like duplexes. And the number, so it means something different. That's a great question because it means something different here. And if you go outside of Cherry Hills and start having conversations, know that they're talking about something different.
Correct. For guest houses in the R1 zone district, their maximum square footage is 3% of the lot area. In R2, it is 4% of the lot area. The caveat to that is that the square footage of that guest house can't exceed the underlying FAR requirement when you combine the home and the square footage of the guest house.
And FAR stands for?
Thank you, Mayor. That stands for floor area ratio. So that is a ratio of the amount of square footage that's above grade compared to the underlying square footage of the lot. So if you do, let's just say R1, it's 2.5 acres, 43,560 square feet in an acre, do 2.5 times that, that gives you your square footage of that lot. The guest house couldn't be more than 3% of that, or the underlying in the R1 zone district is 23% FAR. Thoroughly confused yet? So the floor area ratio is just a function of how big your structure can be based on the square footage of your lot.
So, yeah, so it's a ratio of the house size to the lot size, and it was put in place when, a
been-
little before my time. Right. So, I mean, it's relatively new, but it was, I think, spurred on by just the concept of a really enormous house that took up from setback to setback on all four sides on a 2.5 acre lot, right? I mean, that would just be massive. And so there was a lot of work put into defining new standards and not just putting specific sizes in the code, but more of a proportional, it's all defined in terms of ratios and proportion. How much of your lot can be consumed by
Yeah,
the
so,
house.
so in the R1, no more than 23% of your lot can have
Stuff on it.
stuff, thank you, yes, your home on it, that's correct. Yes,
So,
Exactly.
so I understand that we allow ADUs, and I've seen many guest homes in our neighborhoods. Have any been denied? Do we ever deny those? And are any of them sort of what they're referring to in this legislation, such as factory built and affordable and, that sort of thing? Do you have a sense for?
I can speak,
very
in my time here, we've never denied one.
Okay.
It's generally just a matter of working with the architect and contractor to meet the requirements.
Okay.
Again, in my time here, they've always been approved. Generally, my sense in conversation with property owners and contractors and architects is they're generally for family, generally for either parents that want to come back and live closer, or for kids that are going to college and want to stay somewhat close to home, that sort of stuff. I will say that the current provisions do require that the guest house, the guest house be occupied by non-paying guests or members of the family of the occupant of the primary structure.
Which distinguishes it from really the intent, the legislative intent behind the ADU section, which is to increase housing supply. And so the housing supply, it clearly contemplates rentals, adding it to the overall market. Those folks would say that our ADU doesn't meet that intent. The reality is, though, that we still allow ADUs. So
So just to be crystal clear, so we allow ADUs based on the proportion formula that you've described, but they
Correct.
cannot be rented.
Correct. That's
And we
correct.
only allow them in 2 of our residential zones. This bill would require, or this law requires us to allow them in all of the residential zones. And we are able to place some requirements around them, as Director Workman said, as long as they're not restrictive, right? You can't place requirements that make it impossible to build. But I ultimately think that if you really sat down and did an analysis in Cherry Hills Village, you'd find that it isn't actually very feasible. In R5, for example, in my neighborhood, it would be extremely difficult to build an ADU as contemplated in this law. The law also doesn't really contemplate the concept of an attached ADU, like a basement. A second floor, over a garage apartment for like a nanny suite or something like that. So it really just focuses on detached structures, and I don't have the room to build that on my lot. So I don't think and we need to decide what the city wants to do, but if this were the law in Cherry Hills Village, I still don't think there would be many people looking to build ADUs in my neighborhood because there just isn't room to do it.
So this may not be the time to discuss this, but I'm curious about what the enforcement mechanisms are of the state on the municipalities.
Good question. The legislation doesn't specifically address that. It just says you have to do this.
So, I mean, yeah, it seems like what would happen is that if we did not do it and someone applied to build an ADU and we said, no, it's not allowed in your zone district, they would potentially have grounds for, if they were aware of this law, they would potentially have grounds for a lawsuit. Against the city. Right.
Theoretically, the state AG's office could also proactively, without a complaint, come to enforce the state statute with a lawsuit against the city. I think of those two scenarios, the first one the mayor lays out is far more likely than the second one, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, and before we leave this one, that was one component I wanted to hit on is just lot sizes and setbacks and configuration, especially in the R5 zone district. There may be a handful of lots that are uniquely configured that may be able to accommodate them. I'm sure those are out there. The other component, and it's more relevant for the next one we're going to talk about, the transit-oriented communities, is nor does the legislation really contemplate the available infrastructure, right? So whether that's drainage or water or utilities, sanitation, the law doesn't take into account the impact that those types of things may have on a neighborhood and the existing infrastructure, particularly for older neighborhoods that were constructed decades ago that probably don't have the infrastructure to support this type of improvements. The next one, excuse me, is transit-oriented communities. I'm guessing we'll probably spend a good chunk of time on this one. And just to put it all out there, this is the longest legislation of the bunch. It's probably the most confusing of the bunch. And I wish I could tell you something different, but it's just, you read certain sections of it and you're like, what are you trying to say? So as best I can summarize it in kind of the elevator pitch paradigm. So transit-oriented communities are those communities that are at a metropolitan planning organization, which here in the Denver metro area, DRCOG is the metro planning organization. Local jurisdictions that have a population of 4,000 or more and 75 or more acres of transit area, those qualify as a transit-oriented community. The legislation says that those transit-oriented communities must calculate a housing opportunity goal, or HOG. So what this bill does is it increases density, potential density for areas that are in proximity to transit. Doesn't guarantee building, it doesn't guarantee construction, just simply says that we as a local jurisdiction have to increase our density in zoning, okay? And how do we have to do that? Well, we take our transit area, which I'll get into here in just a second, which is a combination of station area and corridor area. Transit, think of relationship to RTD stations, okay? So Southmore and Bellevue particularly. And then corridor transportation, those are bus routes. So based on the legislation, it's either a quarter mile or half mile. And whatever is within your jurisdiction, within that half mile or quarter mile, that's your transit area. You take that, you multiply it by 40 dwelling units an acre, and that tells you the zoning capacity or the zoning goal, the housing opportunity goal that a community would have to zone for in that transit area. That's a very rudimentary kind of as high as I can make it without super confusing. I see some questions. Yes.
But nowhere in Cherry Hills do we have 40
No.
per acre. I mean,
Correct.
The point is
It's like
it
0.5
doesn't. No,
per
but
acre.
that's my point is how quickly you get to the point that Cherry Hills will never meet HOG.
Well, I
mean,
think,
as it is calculated, those areas are ripe for massive, is it upzoning? Is that the term?
Yes.
Yeah.
So think about it this way, to be a transit-oriented community, you have to have at least 75 acres within this perimeter, like circle, right? So let's assume for a second that a community has that. You have to zone whatever that amount is. You have to upzone it to 40 units per acre. So let's go with the minimum. Let's actually make it say that a community has 80 acres, just to make the math simple. They have to upzone 80 acres for 40 units per acre. That's 3,600 units. Cherry Hills Village has 2,600 households right now.
So
Or 32, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
just a question on, you talked about the corridor and the bus routes. So there are routes down University and Hamden. So are those included? Is that a transit area, some of those stops?
The ones along University have not been identified as part of, so within the state government, DOLA is the agency that's been tasked with kind of overseeing and implementing this. What? Oh, the Department of Local Affairs. Excuse me. So they're the ones who've been charged with kind of coming up with these maps of where these transit areas are. There's been nothing identified along University. The real, I guess, implications for Cherry Hills Village are two stations. One is Bellevue Station, the other is Southmore Station. And then there's one bus line, that's the 40 line, that basically connects Colorado Station and Southmore Station. And there's a portion of that line that runs down Colorado Boulevard and then east and west on Hamden. Based on how you read the legislation and how you calculate the frequency of service, there's a portion along Hamden that could be considered part of our Cherry Hills Village transit area.
That is a topic for
Yes.
discussion at the retreat. We will be specifically discussing how that's defined and what the different, where there is ambiguity in how it is interpreted.
Well, from the most favorable to the state, looking most favorable, do we have 75 acres? I mean, that's a lot of acreage.
Yes.
We
Yes.
would, if
Yes.
we looked at it as the most,
Yes,
In the most favorable
Favorable
interpretation, yes.
for the state, yes.
how much do we have on the most favorable?
About 100 acres,
Okay.
which is 4,000 units.
Yeah.
So
And just
mayor's-
as
So one thing that we can, that I think is important to note in this conversation is that we can kind of rule out the Southmore Station because thankfully, with the help of our state senator last year, an amendment was added to this law that defines what's called a walk shed. And we had a really great, we were an example that if you put a pin on Southmore Station, Southmore Light Rail Station is on the west side of I-25, but the parking and the entrance to it is on the east side. And so in order to get to the Southmore, if you put a pin there and drew a half-mile radius, a lot of Southmore Vista neighborhood would be in that circle. But it was a 2-mile walk. If you look on Google Maps and say, walk from this address to the Southmore Light Rail Station, you have to walk up to Hamden, across I-25, and back down. It was a 2-mile walk. And luckily, Senator Bridges that made sense to him, how that was problematic. And he suggested this concept of a walk shed that was added to this, that it's the walking distance that matters when you're separated by an access-controlled state highway like an interstate or a railroad where you can't just cross over wherever you want. So I think that excludes the Southmore Vista and just the Southmore Vista station. The other two things then are the Bellevue station and the bus, which Director Workman has up here.
Yeah.
And now I see, so that's what that buffer means, 114 acres, is that what we're
That's
talking about
correct.
within our?
Within the yellow
Yellow.
polygons there, yes, that's correct. Now, the state does say that they recognize there's, quote, what they call exempt parcels. For example, right-of-way can be considered an exempt parcel, parks can be considered an exempt parcel, things like that. So that's where, on here, it says there's 114, plus there's almost 6 acres of right-of-way and another 3 acres of park. So fat line exercise is about 100 acres that would be left. But again, some of that we can talk about at the retreat in March about how we can interpret, or how it should be interpreted, of how those measurements are and have been taken.
And the other thing that, when you talked about the 40, I just want to make sure that when we are looking ahead, the 35 does go down Hampton to basically the old Cinderella City. So it does have stops along the way, but if you're talking about including 40, we might have to also bring up talking about 35 routes.
Potentially, right now, that's not on DOLA's radar. Potentially, it could be. But I think it gets back to the conversation of how we interpret the overall bus service frequency, when those timelines were established, all that sort of stuff.
So that in order to be a transit corridor, bus line has to have service every 15 minutes, at least every 15 minutes for 8 hours a day.
During the week.
During the week. 35 does not, well, the problem is that bus service changes all the time. When this legislation was passed last year, neither of the routes had that kind of service. And things change, they often do, and I don't know how a community is expected to rezone every time RTD changes their schedule every 6 months. But that's.
Whether it's upzoning or downzoning.
Yes, exactly. So that is a key, and then we'll have our executive session to understand all the legal ramifications of these laws. And then during our retreat, these are the types of things that we will discuss, how the city needs to act in accordance with these laws.
Yes, ma'am.
So it looks like on this, that, did you I'm sure you did, I'm sure you've read this a million times, one of the exceptions or one of the exclusions is a cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Bethany Lutheran Church has a crematorium.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Oh,
Bethany
which
Lutheran.
does?
Bethany is right.
Oh, right, yeah, on Dahlia and,
It's at the
okay.
right angle corner.
Yeah, I guess we should ask if any other,
Yeah, if Bethany doesn't.
This one up here?
yeah, Dahlia and Hamden, right on the corner is Bethany. They have a crematorium. And a cemetery is excluded, it's a exempt parcel. Remains, and so that,
I'm so sorry.
but, so that, maybe that's an exempt.
I don't know.
That's, yeah, well, and these are the, I think, rules are put out there, and I think the job of this council will be to determine how we need to interpret those rules and kind of make those decisions, and if we get it wrong, we need to, well, that's what we're gonna do, so.
Sorry, I thought you were. Anything, I don't want to, we can always come back to it, but that's the last slide I have in transit-oriented communities, so if there's other, yeah.
So what about the references to, like, interconnecting with other neighboring communities? So I think about that property that Shay is gonna, do, that is around the corner. I think about, there was one reference to 3 miles, and that you should include in your report, anything that's happening within 3 miles of your boundary. So you think about Orchard Station, and you think about, what's it called, Marina Square
Yeah.
on Bellevue, and the Shea properties, and maybe others that could I'm not sure, but could count for something if we acknowledge those that are within.
I'm not sure if
Or-
it crosses jurisdictional boundaries, though. That's a really good
But it
question,
says
though.
outside
Yeah?
of your boundary.
Okay.
I think I took a note of what page that was on. I'll find out in a minute. And then kind of with the same thing, what did it say? Oh, areas of potential growth within 3 miles of the boundaries is on page 132 of our packet. I'm just curious about engagement or,
I'm not,
partnerships that we could form with.
I'm not positive. I mean, I'll look at it also, and, certainly our city attorney is going to do this for us. But within 3 miles of your boundary for larger jurisdictions is easy, but I think that may be referring to looking at areas of growth that are on the outside of your jurisdiction, that within 3 miles of your boundary could be included in this. I don't know for sure that it crosses jurisdictional lines, that you read that as within 3 miles of our exterior boundary. It might go to our boundary and come back 3 miles, is what that language is referring to. I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things we'll have to figure out and talk about.
And is that also, is that in the transit-oriented communities bill, or is that in the housing needs planning bill? Yeah, I think that's the housing needs planning bill. That's the
bet-
next one,
okay.
yeah.
Yep, if it's that far into the packet, you're probably right. I don't have it noted.
But I like the thinking.
Yes,
We all need to have that kind of attitude as we read through these
Yep.
state bills.
Read
so.
through them with a fine-tooth comb and come with your thoughts, yeah.
That did spur a thought that's worth mentioning. The bill does say that even though you may have your transit area located in one portion of your city, the increased density doesn't have to go in that area. You can put it in other parts of your jurisdiction. There's some things that you have to check the boxes. The DOLA says, yes, we're okay with that. But potentially you can put that increased zoning density in different portions of your city.
And correct me if I'm right, I believe.
I won't correct you if you're right.
Correct me if I'm right. Yes, okay, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while. I believe that originally one of the largest outcries among municipalities about House Bill 1313 was that originally the penalty for failure to do this was to withhold a community's highway user transportation, HUTF, highway user transportation fee, fund, money, road money. And that was taken out. And during our executive session, we will hear from our city attorney about what potential ramifications are if we fail to meet this standard, because there's some pretty high, displacement goals and affordability goals, and which I have no idea how we could make land in Cherry Hills Village affordable, but.
Also, on that slide previous to this where you had those dates, something by June and then something by December, there are other things between then,
Yes.
right? There are other reports.
Yes.
Isn't there another pretty big report at the end of 2026? And don't you have to have, when you said displacement, it reminded me, I think I read that you had to.
I think that's the housing need planning one. I think, yeah.
Right.
I think that's the next one too. But yes, I mean, we need to be doing all these at the same time and.
Sure.
Yeah, there are other important dates, if you will. Those are just two that are kind of the biggest
Yes,
deadlines, if you will.
I think there is another HOG report due.
But it is important to note that the road money stick got taken out of the bill.
That was a big source of contention for
That was huge.
local jurisdictions. The fourth piece of legislation that came out of last year is planning for affordable housing, whether a jurisdiction wants to or not. before December 31st of next year, and every 6 years thereafter, local governments must conduct and publish a housing needs assessment or participate in a regional housing needs assessment. Again, the legislation says that council must consider that assessment at a public meeting and submit that assessment to DOLA for essentially their review and approval. Then by January 1st of 28, and then every 6 years thereafter, a local government must create a housing action plan, which develops legislative actions, regional coordination, and information for the public regarding efforts that the city is doing to address housing needs in the city. I just want to highlight just a couple from your packet. Some of the things that we would have to do is an assessment of the effects of existing zoning and density permitted in the local government's jurisdiction on the development of the number and types of dwelling units identified in the housing needs assessment. Let's see here. Plan to promote the equitable and efficient development of the number and types of dwelling units identified in the housing needs assessment necessary to satisfy the housing needs and local government at different income levels, including low, extremely low, very low, moderate, and middle income housing. So certainly be a big change from the language in our master plan of, certainly the master plan language isn't exclusive of any income level of housing. It just aims to keep us at a single-family, low-density residential community.
So is there any guidance from the state as to how we determine the housing needs?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, yes, I mean, they lay out here kind of,
Wasn't clear to me.
and so one of the things that it says in here is that you can either a city can do its own, or it can just use a regional one that has been done. DRCOG has conducted, and this is a very labor-intensive process. DRCOG has conducted a housing needs assessment for the region. I'm not sure that our council would completely concur with their interpretation of our needs as a community. But that being said, one of the things that communities that's come up at Metro Mayor's Caucus and in other places is that you have to have this public meeting, and DRCOG is encouraging communities to hold a public meeting regarding the DRCOG housing needs assessment, so that if you decide you want to use the DRCOG housing needs assessment, you have done the required steps. Just holding the meeting doesn't mean that you're going to use that as your housing needs assessment, but they're basically encouraging communities to go through those steps so that if it got down to the wire and you want it, you could use that. But I think our new DRCOG representative, and I'm sure our former DRCOG representative would be happy to come do a download with us as well. I haven't fully read it, but I have heard that I'm not sure that that's going to be the direction we want to go ultimately.
I can just tell you, I've seen a presentation, and they have an online tool to plug your community in, and it spits out the numbers of affordable units you should strive to get in the future.
To your question of, is there guidance? There is a number of what they deem to be an affordable housing, monetary level that they come up with of, that the average income area is X and a house has to be of, or a dwelling unit has to be of X dollars or less, of which none of ours meet, but, things like that. There is a lot of guidance in that DRCOG of how they went through and calculated the number of units that we should have in Cherry Hills or in any other area. You can look at the underlying methodology and see all that, and I'll report back in what it was.
I mean, it's all laid out here, like estimate your water needs, assess your market limitations,
Number of jobs.
number of jobs, number of households, all that. It's calculate your median income and,
So the Dr. Cog tool is sort of a broad tool that looks at regions, really. It wasn't intended to necessarily go block by block, and obviously Cherry Hills Village is built out. So to accomplish the goals that are in the Dr. Cog assessment, there would have to be some sort of demolition. It's some sort of urban renewal to make room for that amount of project. I can tell you, for the Dr. Cog study recommended for affordable units, new affordable units in the duration of the plan, that Cherry Hills Village should add approximately 350 new affordable units.
What is the region? Is it the South Metro area that they have?
good
So
question.
Dr. Cog, it's for the entire 10-county region, but they broke up the 10-county region into 6 sub-areas. We are located in the southeast sub-area, along with, the Tech Center, Littleton, Centennial, Parker. And the reason they broke them up into sub is a recognition that the characteristics of the different areas are different. And that is probably accurate. But to say that the Dr. Cog study had this policy outcome in mind when it was crafted is not necessarily true. The reality is the parameters they were using, looking at the number of jobs, the question was, does the state give guidance as to what this assessment has to use when it creates its numbers? To some degree, there is some guidance in there that's somewhat similar to the Dr. Cog numbers. Given the fact that we're built out, to say nothing of affordability or there, we're going to have a hard time just adding any new units, net.
Well, the other thing too, though, is that if you look at those criteria specific to Cherry Hills Village, number of jobs. Yes. I mean, it's in the 3 digits, most likely, including the clubs and the schools and, the median income. I mean, affordability takes on a completely different, definition if you're only looking at the median income of our community. So these are the kinds of things that we will, be tackling. I think what's important to say is that this type of study is not something that, Paul does on his own. This is, I don't know what Dr. Cog spent on theirs, and obviously it's a much bigger region, but it's expensive to go out and do this. This is another one where we have to submit the plan. We have to submit a housing needs assessment that does all these things.
They appropriated a little bit.
Yeah.
I have a different question. Do we still have 2 or 3 residences that are being used as group homes? I know they're on the other, it looks to me like on the map, if they're still there, that they're on the northwest corner of the city and not the northeast corner of the city, but.
That's where I would look for folks that that have a little bit more history than I do. I'm not aware of any technical group homes.
There are categorical group homes, I think, that exist, but they aren't the classic, thinking of the ones by the floodplain over there, right? Those are probably categorically, according to the state, a group home, but they are not what you would call some sort of rehab center as far, for a big giant inpatient, outpatient facility with hundreds of people. It
Well, and actually, I think
They're
they,
residences that are turned into.
Correct.
but they
That's
even, I
exactly
think
right.
they
Living
currently comply with our current occupancy.
The ones I'm aware of over in the northwest corner currently comply.
Like no more than 3 unrelated people.
Meaning they're not big giant facilities. These are really, really small.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to kind of reiterate what the mayor was saying, just in terms of scope and scale for a housing needs assessment, I would probably put that on the same scope as a master plan effort, which was 18 to 24 months and probably $250,000 worth of budget. So they are very time intensive and they are a long process.
And the firms that specialize in this will be busy. So my guess is their costs will actually go up. And the ability to get somebody to to do it. We will not be a big spender because we just don't have the acreage. So us even getting a firm to be able to do it is going to be an uphill battle.
So that's all I have in terms of the formal presentation. I would end just by reiterating, we did go through the master plan update, which 3 of you were on our technical advisory committee. Right, our community vision is really to be a low-density, safe, serene neighborhood. Our land use section of the master plan talks about maintaining low-density, single-family residential development. And so a lot of this is in contrary to what you, the residents, the citizens, have said about what you want Cherry Hills Village to be. And I just want to make sure that that gets continued to put on the record that as a home rule municipality, we have our own master plan that says this is what we want to be. And so that kind of concludes my formal remarks, but certainly available for any additional questions or thoughts that you all may have.
The only one that I would add is, while it certainly doesn't rise to the level of these, but I've seen discussion about one of the bills, I'm not sure if it's been introduced or will be introduced, but for instance, limiting the amount of sod that you can have on a property, certainly with our large lot sizes and restrictions. It's the overall principle, again, that it's an intrusion on home rule. And I don't know, maybe I've missed other ones, but that one jumps out at me as well.
Well, there are plenty this
Yeah,
session.
there was legislation to that effect last year,
Yeah.
but it applied to public property, not private property. So
My
there may be
understanding is
something
this
this
is the
year.
next step,
Yeah.
that it will.
I've heard of that as well.
And, well, of course, we've already talked about it in a couple of last meetings, but we've got the religious,
And that has
Whatever
been
bill that-
introduced, and I think Paul sent it out, right?
yeah.
So I just wanted to update everyone and let you know that as it related to these bills and a lot of them that are coming this year, the Metro Mayor's Caucus and CML are pretty firmly united in opposition to a lot of these bills. And even though, and it's nonpartisan, it's mayors and councils of various parties, even though some communities feel like these are good ideas for their community, and so some of them, now that these bills are laws, everybody was opposed to them when they were going through the legislature. Now that they're law, different communities are responding to them in different ways. There are some communities that, I'll use the ADU bill as an example. There are some communities that already do that. Sheridan is an example. So they're not obviously very concerned. There are some communities like Littleton who their council seems to think it's a good idea. Their residents maybe not necessarily. They've been having some pretty contentious meetings, but Inglewood had a lot of these types of changes and that they implemented on their own prior to this bill even passing. So there's a huge spectrum of communities' response to this legislation. And as you can see, these timelines are starting to get pretty tight. And so I think that that's our next step in this process, is just deciding what our response will be.
Stay tuned for the 18th, right?
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Is there any other questions? Otherwise, we'll take a 10-minute break before the regular council meeting. It is 6:31, and I will call the city council meeting to order. Will the clerk please call a roll?
Counselor Heller,
Here?
Counselor Eber,
Here.
Counselor Holen,
Here.
Counselor McGuire absent, Counselor Robinson,
Happy to be here.
Counselor Fisher.
Everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I know I confessed at a previous meeting that every time I do that, I have this fear that I'm going to forget the words. Now I notice that whenever I stand and look at the camera, and instead of the flag, and I have to remind myself that I'm saying the pledge to the flag, not the camera. Just weird things. All right. We have audience participation, and I just saw a lot of people walk in. So I'm going to call the first person up. But if there's anyone who wants to speak tonight about anything on the agenda or otherwise, we're going to ask that you sign this sheet. Is there anyone who does want to speak who didn't have a chance to sign up? No? Okay. Yes? No? Yes? Do I need to sign? I'm not clear. On the other one. Oh, yeah, that's right. We have a separate sign-in sheet. This is for anyone who wants to speak about anything other than the trail gate request, right? Okay. And Michael, did you want to speak about something other than the? Yes. Okay, great. Then thank you. And your last, is it? Adi, Michael Adi. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record. And you have 5 minutes. And just for the benefit of everyone, I won't repeat it when the time comes, but we just ask that everyone be respectful of people's comments. That means no booing and conversely no applause or anything like that. And you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
So my name is Michael Audie. I'm a physician here in Colorado, and I live at 2 Glenmore Circle. And I'm going to apologize to the council and all the people here talking about a topic for 4 minutes for time that you'll never get back. This is about pickleball and Cherry Hills Village. Pickleball is popular. Pickleball has become a nuisance for municipalities and homeowners. I did email a sample to you on the advice of Councilman Heller from my district so that you can follow along. The links are there for you to look at. So it doesn't take long to Google thousands of articles about dilution of homeowner value in the vicinity of pickleball courts. Some say up to 20%. In our local population in the Front Range, it's been in the media, it's been in business journals, it's been in the Denver Post. In fact, the Denver Post talked about removal of courts in Congress and Eisenhower Parks last year due to complaints about noise and player actions. Lone Tree is still in litigation about their courts, and the Denver Post listed that Centennial had a 6-month moratorium on their courts to research it, and lifting it in September and passing new regulations forbidding construction of courts, and that's why I'm here. I'm asking the council to consider the ordinance that Centennial went through and thought out pretty well, actually. It's a nice compromise. It has things for developers to look at when they're trying to push their agenda, and it has protections for homeowners. People like me who don't want them at all, if they can mitigate to these parameters, I could probably have to live with them. This includes no courts within 250 feet of a property. If it's 250 to 600 feet, you can get a special permit, but it has to be mitigated to 47 decibels. I know that Cherry Hills has traditionally done this on a case-by-case basis, using 60 decibels as their limit, which is basically for backyard parties and bands and construction and things. It's actually at odds with the Colorado Noise Abatement Statute, which goes to 50 decibels in residential areas. The master plan for Cherry Hills Village, we heard it tonight, it's serene, semi-rural, open space, low density, quality of life, and sustainability. And under the Community Character Actions Plan, it actually says in CC-1-D, you have to update the codes to preserve the character of the city and provide a framework for design and regulatory actions to evaluate applications for development and site improvements through the Planning and Zoning Committee. I feel that's what this ordinance from Centennial will do. Now, why is this important to me? Well, it doesn't matter if it's a charter school, if it's a church, if it's at somebody's backyard or a club, somebody's going to want to do this because it's popular right now, and they tend to do it where there are a lot of homeowners. The Glenmore renovation, I waited until after the renovation was approved to do this, and I'm here alone because I don't want anybody else to get retribution, because I'm not disparaging the club in any way. I love the renovation. I just don't like these courts being right by the guard gate. The guard gate is very close to the homes. I live in number 2, so I'm at the probably 250-foot level, but homeowner number 1, who hasn't even moved in yet, the property line is 100 feet from the courts, which is well under 250, and his home is about 160 feet, and I used Google Maps to put that in the packet that I sent you. It may also reach over to the farm even, I don't know. But we're not just talking about a couple of people playing with paddles, you know, we're talking about 4 courts, 16 players, 12 hours a day, sun up to sundown, leagues, ladders, tournaments, interclub, and all that. So it's a bigger problem than you think, and I don't think you can do it on a case-by-case basis anymore. If you want to follow the master plan and provide regulation for planning and zoning to have a framework for protections for homeowners and still allow developers to do this, I encourage you to look at the ordinance that was passed 9-0 by the Centennial City Council. So they thought it out really well. I really have nothing else, and I apologize for even talking about this for 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. And good timing, I think. It's nice to consider things when there's nothing burning, so thank you. Okay. We will move on to reports from members of city boards and commissions. See anyone? No? The consent agenda, I would just like to point out that item A was not available, so I guess somebody please remove that.
Right. Any other removals? I move to approve consent agenda items 6B and C. Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Item 6A will be presented at the next council meeting. Moving on to new business, we have the Cherry Hills Park Homeowners Association Trail Gate request, and I'll turn it over to Director Golding.
I'll turn on my mic. Before you this evening, you have a request from the Cherry Hills Park HOA to install a gate on city-owned public trail. And just for your reference, inside this circle here is the Cherry Hills Park subdivision. The red lines on this map are the city's trails throughout the area. And again, this is the subdivision and the proposed gate area, which is at the north side of the subdivision. So the timeline for this entire process has been detailed in the staff memo that was provided in your packets. We've detailed that as the original request was received by the city in December of 2023. Staff in the Public Works Department, including park staff, as well as community development staff and police department staff, have all reviewed the requests, and their comments are fully outlined, again, in the staff report. The review that was completed was comprehensive, and all departments have taken the time to go through this. As you know, safety and security of all of our residents is at the core of our mission as an organization, and we take concerns from our residents very seriously. While our officers cannot be on the trail system all the time, they are currently patrolling our trails in the evening hours by car, golf cart, bicycle, and with proactive drone patrols as time permits. We are fortunate in Cherry Hills to have a higher than average staffing level thanks to City Council's commitment to community safety. With security being the highest concern, there are other factors that must be taken into consideration when reviewing this request. Because the request involves a public trail, there are many factors that need to be considered to ensure that the decisions made are in the best interest of the entire system and community. Cherry Hills Village has evolved over the last 75 years into a unique residential community. The community has preserved much of its heritage and cultivated a distinct character in its neighborhoods, parks, open spaces, trails, and other public spaces. The importance of these open spaces and trail network have been communicated through the goals identified by the community in the master plan and reinforced through the recently passed amendment to the city charter in section 3.9. Historically, the city's parks, trails, and open spaces have been fully open to the public. Public parks trails are currently open every day of the year between the hours of 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. Further, there are no gate encumbrances on any public trails in the city. Staff is aware there's been some confusion on a gate on a trail in the Charlevoix subdivision. But to clarify, that trail is private and on a tract of land owned by the Charlevoix HOA. The city does not own or maintain that trail. With that being said, the addition of a gate on public trail may create the perception that the trail is private and not for public use, even during open hours. Should this application be approved, the installation of a gate on public trail would create a change in the historic use and operation of the city's trail system. Staff feels that this request does not meet the character of the city and does not uphold or enforce the vision as intended by the master plan. This vision is up on the screen and more fully discussed in the attached staff report. Additionally, there are a number of guiding principles and goals within the parks and open space section of the master plan, and in staff's opinion, does not support this request, including guiding principle number 1, the city will preserve, enhance, and expand the parks, trails, and open space areas and the connectivity of the trail system. Furthermore, in November of 2022, the city charter was amended by the voter and states all parks, trails, and open space located within the corporate limits of the city in which the city has or hereafter acquires a property interest shall be held, protected, and maintained in the public trust for the use, benefit, and enjoyment of the public, and shall not be pledged, vacated, granted, transferred, or conveyed directly or indirectly without a majority of vote of the registered electors voting on the question. The exception to that is a lease or license of land or improvements within a park or open space which does not exceed 5 years, inclusive of all renewals, shall not be subject to the above requirement of a majority vote of the registered electors, provided that both the provision of the license or lease and the use of the license or leasee would not materially diminish the public's opportunity to use and enjoy the respective park and/or open space during the terms of the lease or license. Based on these charter requirements, the gate, if approved, would only be allowed for a maximum of 5 years, at which time it would need to be removed or transferred to city ownership, including repair and maintenance. Staff has concerns about the long-term maintenance and upkeep of this gate, as well as the precedent that it would set for other gates to be installed throughout the trail system that would also need to become property of the city. The applicant asserts the gate could provide additional security for the homeowners within the HOA. The police department specifically monitored the north-south and east-west trails in a period in 2023 and again in 2024, between the dates of November 2nd, 2023 and December 12th, 2023. The police department conducted extra patrols on the trails at and around the Cherry Hills Park Drive neighborhood. Officers utilized drones equipped with thermal imaging, e-bikes, a golf cart, foot patrol, and detected subjects accessing the trail system after hours. 2 motion Motion-activated trail cameras were also positioned on the path to identify if subjects were utilizing the trails at night. During the first 42-day period, no subjects were seen by the officers on the trails between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. To provide additional data, the trails were once again monitored after hours in from May 8th till June 11th of 2024. During that time period, the East-West Trail recorded after-hours use by teenagers once, and the North-South camera detected 2 teenagers walking a dog at one time. The full reports for both of these monitoring periods are included in your packets. As there's no procedure outlined in the city code for this type of request, we went and looked at the purpose of PTRC and why PTRC is here. So the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission has been established to advise city councils on matters related to parks, trails, recreation, and open space within the community. So on August 8th, staff presented the request to PTRC, and at that time, PTRC reviewed the application and made a unanimous recommendation to city council to deny this request. Staff feels the addition of a gate may create the perception that trails are private and not for public use, even during open hours. Should this application be approved, the installation of the gate on a public trail would create a change in the historic use and operation of the trail system. As such, it would be anticipated that several neighborhoods with trails that abut their homes would request gates to be installed. Staff has prepared a recommended motion for the request and is available for questions prior to the HOA presenting their request.
So we'll start with any questions. Does anyone have questions?
I have one
Councilor
question. With regard to that Charlou Trail that you mentioned, that you said really is a private trail and not subject. So in other words, the Cherry Hills map is wrong.
Yes. And we are in the process of changing that map this year, and that will be corrected.
Okay, good. And then you also indicated, and I think that's correct, because of our charter, you can only have a 5-year lease, and it can't be subject to renewals. And a renewal would be a provision in that lease to extend it.
Correct.
But it is true that we could sit back and say, hey, it's a 5-year lease, at which point in time it expires, and the city would have to take that back, but could turn around and go to the applicant and say, do you want to enter into a new lease? And it would be a new lease. It would not be a renewal of the existing lease.
That would be a legal question.
Well, it would be, but I think that that's a fair interpretation.
There's a lot of ways to interpret this, but that is one.
So I also had a technical question about the charter language. So it struck me that it says, all parks, trails, and open space located within the corporate limits of the city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, can't do anything without a majority vote of registered electors voting on the question. Then the next sentence says, a lease and/or license of land or improvements within a park or open space. Does not say trail. And so I'm wondering if there's even any provision to lease trails at all.
Mayor, concur. Also, your charter defers to state statute when the charter does not speak to it. And under state statute, you have plenary authority to regulate trails, ways, et cetera, public ways, parks, public grounds. So in theory, but indirectly, your charter doesn't speak to.
So the charter doesn't speak to it, but does the first sentence, is a lease considered a pledge? It's not a vacation, a grant, transfer, conveyance,
It is a conveyance.
It's a
of an
convey-
interest.
okay.
It's a possessory interest in land.
So I guess what struck me very recently is that, throughout this document, we've talked about leasing it and having the city take it back in 5 years, but was there ever any discussion about the alternative that's contemplated here, that it would be taken to a vote of the people? Did anybody who was involved in these discussions, was there, not that you know of? Okay,
That was not part of the request to.
that was not part of the
to take this
discussion.
to the
Okay,
vote.
thank you. Yes, Counselor Heller.
Maybe for the chief, I'm not sure, but just a little bit about the security issue that's causing the request for the gate. Is it mainly pedestrian traffic? Is there an off-road sort of vehicular traffic thing? What is the threat? And if it is mainly pedestrian traffic, does a gate really mitigate that much? A bad actor seems like it's pretty easy to get over or around it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the general concern would be around pedestrian traffic, not vehicular traffic. I know the applicant has a presentation, so I'll maybe reserve my comments until after that to kind of encompass both your question and any concerns that the rest of council might have. Thank you.
Mayor, I also have a question for the chief.
Yes.
Is it your observation that there is any more or less criminal activity in that neighborhood than other areas of the village?
Certainly with regards to that specific neighborhood, no, there are very few instances of criminal activity that have occurred. Have there been crimes? Absolutely, as is true in every neighborhood in the city. But with respect to the overall crime rate of Cherry Hills Village, it is minuscule at best.
Any other questions before we hear from the applicant? Okay, so we'd like to have the applicant come make a presentation. Would that be Mr. DeSigiu or? Okay. We don't really have a process for it's not our public hearing process, so I don't know if we had a time limit, but
I figured about 45 minutes.
keep it under an hour.
I'll be brief. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
We appreciate you folks taking time to review this. And
Just please state your name and address for the record.
sorry. Richard DeSigiu. My name is Richard DeSigiu. I live at 8 Cherry Hills Park, and I am president of the HOA of Cherry Hills Park. And once again, we appreciate everybody taking the time. I want to start off by saying thank you to our great police department and Chief Lyons. We very much appreciate all the great effort and dedication. In an ideal world, we would not be here tonight making this kind of request. But the realities of today's environment, you mentioned Cherry Hill's been 75 years. I've been here 24 years. And even over the past several years, there's been a change in the complexion. The metro environment, the metropolitan environment has been compromised. Chief Lyons, and maybe we can play that video in a moment, just to refresh so everybody can appreciate. Sometimes the statistics, Mr. Goley, don't really tell you the whole story. So respectfully disagree with your conclusions. You referenced the stat. In reality, not too long ago, Chief Lyons will recall, there was a break-in. 3 individuals tried to break into a home, into somebody's master bedroom. These people would be here tonight, but they're still shaken up. You have to think about and understand, how would you folks, how would you absorb that if your house was broken into? So in conjunction with, not too long ago, there were, I think, maybe 200 or 300 people here in response to a video that we'll show of people walking around with guns into backyards. Chief Lyons, we took to heart your communication, the emphasis on safety and security, we took significant measures to enhance the security and safety of Cherry Hills Park. And we have some exposure in that area that is, it's atypical. You have the trail bisects through the neighborhood. That's unusual. We do have problems, and what I was referencing, those people that access that home, Mr. Goley, they access the home through the trail system. So that's not a statistic, that's real. People are experiencing that. We want people to enjoy the trails. What we want to do is what Chief Lyons emphasized. We want to lock the door. That's all. It is unlawful by city statute, we're not creating this statute, to be on the trail system at 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Our proposal is a gate, and it would be done in the highest caliber. It would harmonize with the environment, and it would only activate during those hours. I don't want to be long-winded, and I'd like to defer to our security consultant, our expert that's been reviewing this, and he can go through it so you understand the thoroughness that how we approached this, how we looked at it, and it wasn't just a spontaneous, this is a real risk for this particular area. And I think the city council and the people of Cherry Hills, or the city council, your representatives, you represent your constituents, I don't think we can keep our head in the sand as a community relative to this risk. We have to create some deterrent. And this is in the spirit of locking the door and creating deterrent. And we've had real issues. The statistics don't tell you the real story. And how many times does it take? How many times? I just referred to a couple that is still shaken up. So is that not the benchmark? Does it have to be more than that? So I think this is a prudent, common sense approach to mitigating risk and providing deterrence. So can you please?
Laura, can you help so that it doesn't seem like the sound, to show this video to make sure the sound comes on? Go ahead, Glenn.
I'm sorry, we don't usually show.
No, that's, this was, I said 45, it's a movie, it's like a little. Thank you. I need Alexa.
Very, well-to-do neighborhood that's typically considered pretty safe. Increasing patrols overnight. 4 suspects caught on camera, not only casing homes and cars, but also they appear to be carrying weapons around.
Let's get right to Jim Hooley on it live this morning at Cherry Hills Police Headquarters and talk about really concerning video this morning, Jim.
Yeah, Ashley, good morning. Yeah, when you see the pictures here, the images that we have here from security cameras here, these pictures of these guys, as you said, with weapons, very large weapons, in the neighborhoods here in Cherry Hills Village. That's why they're so concerned. That's why they've increased the patrols, and that's why police are now asking for help trying to find these 4 suspects they say are armed and dangerous. Here's the latest on the investigation. Once again, take a look at the pictures that we have here. You can see the suspects casually walking along, armed with what appears to be rifles, very large rifles. They're all covered up. They have hoodies on. They have masks on, too. Investigators say they tried to enter several homes here in Cherry Hills through doors on Monday night and Tuesday morning. Fortunately, they were not able to get inside, but police say they did manage to steal 2 vehicles, get inside and take off, get away with those. And these guys may have hit other locations too. Cherry Hills Police now working with other departments in the area to get these guys because they have had similar reports of similar suspects throughout the entire Denver area very recently. So police are working on that. But once again, you look at those images, those are pretty eye-opening, scary images with these 4 suspects with what appears to be rifles in their neighborhoods here in Cherry Hills Village. They are armed and dangerous. If you have any information whatsoever, police say please call 911 right away. Live in Cherry Hills, I'm Jim Hooley, Fox 30.
Obviously, you had put up the gate earlier, and the area that we're referencing is the north side where there appears to be the most activity. You can see there's an access point from University Boulevard and from Colorado Boulevard, if you extended that out. On the items, I'll let the security expert, and we have our attorney here, but my proposal is we would donate, we would absorb this cost, and we would donate the gate to the city. So our interest is in safety, safety, safety. That's what we're focused on. And we're recognizing that, unfortunately, the metro environment has changed. So I'm going to pass it over to Hal Shugart and let him give you more perspective on our analysis and why we're here tonight. And as I said, thank you. We appreciate your reviewing it. So further ado.
Thank you for being here. Mr. Shugart, if you would just state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Hal Shugart, and my work address is 4 West Dry Creek Circle, Suite 100, Littleton, 80120.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you all tonight about this subject. I got involved in this primarily because of my previous work with Mr. DeCidio and providing security services for him and his family at his residences. A little bit about my background, if you'll allow me, or indulge me for a few minutes, and then I have a statement that will kind of walk us through this analysis. I have 25 plus years experience in law enforcement. I worked about 17 years with the Lakewood, Colorado Police Department. While I was there, I was a canine handler. I spent almost 15 years in patrol, and I was also a burglary detective. After leaving the Lakewood Police Department, I went to work at the Arapahoe County District Attorney's Office. I was an investigator there. Ultimately, I was assigned to their chronic offender program. While I was there, I assisted Cherry Hills Village Police Department with a sex assault along the Highline Canal Trail. I assisted detectives with burglaries at several homes in the Buell neighborhood when it was under construction. So I became very familiar with Cherry Hills Police Department and the Cherry Hills neighborhoods. Also, as a canine handler, when Cherry Hills Village used to have a canine program, Cherry Hills Village.
We do again now, but yes, thank you.
That's wonderful. I applaud you. But their canine handler used to come over and train with us at Lakewood. After I left the DA's office, I went into the private security field for a brief time. And then I went back into law enforcement and worked as an investigator at the Colorado Attorney General's office. And there I worked primarily insurance fraud cases, but they were obviously a lot of property-oriented crimes. So I have a great deal of experience with property-related crimes. And in the process, or during the time that I was at the AG's office, I also got my master's degree in security management from the University of Denver. So I was looking forward to something to do after I left law enforcement. I left law enforcement in 2011 and opened up my business up around that same time. And as part of my business, I've been designing physical security plans and physical security systems for about 12 years. So this isn't anything new to me. When I looked at the issue of Cherry Hills Park, which I was hired to consult with them after the 2023 crime spree that was detailed in the video, I started looking at this problem like I do all physical security plans that I put together, and I start looking at it with 4 goals in mind. Deter, and if I can't deter our adversary, then I want to detect them as early as possible. And as soon as and as part of that, there's an overlap with another component or goal. I want to delay what it is that they're trying to do. I want to make it as hard for them to do what they're trying to do as possible, because in the interim, that's going to impact our 4th goal, which is the response. So if I can get them detected and delay them from doing whatever they're going to do, then the chief and his team can get there and in the response and hopefully make an arrest. So those are our goals. And so when I'm looking at this gate and the security plan that we've implemented here at Cherry Hills Park, those are the goals we had in mind. The trail system through Cherry Hills Park is somewhat unique in that it essentially bisects, as the map shows, the private property of the community. On either side of the trail is private property, and this includes a private roadway. But for this trail system going through the Cherry Hills Park community, this is a gated community, and there would be no public access to this community. I'm a native of Colorado. When I was a kid, I used to swim in swim meets over here at Cherry Hills Country Club. I'm familiar with this area, and like many of you who've lived here a long time, have seen significant changes. I don't think we can look at this gate proposition entirely through a historical perspective, in that this is something that's never been done before. Times are changing, and I think those times require that we adapt to deal with those, particularly when it comes to public safety. The police department's doing that. They've reestablished their K-9 program. They've added additional patrol personnel. They've established a drone program. And again, I applaud all of these things. I think they're wonderful. The proposed gate infringes on no one's right to use the trail system, consistent with the lawful hours of usage. Anyone who encounters this gate that is closed, barring emergency services, shouldn't be there in the first place, because they're on the trails after they've closed. And the fact that the city council had deemed it noteworthy or had deemed it necessary to establish hours of usage tells me that the park hours were designed with public safety and noise factors as well. So, when Mr. Goldie talks about the park system being totally open, it's not totally open. There are hours of usage. The Cherry Hills Park residents also think that there are appropriate times when non-residents should be able to traverse their community. The proposed gate is a common sense approach to trying to limit after-hours access to the community, consistent with the HOA's desire to enhance the security of the community and protect the safety and welfare of the community residents, as well as the substantial investments they've made in their homes and property. I want to address the city's response to the proposal, because there's a couple of points that Mr. Goldie highlighted, and I want to address those things. For first, have to do with the audits of the trail usage. The first audit was conducted in December of 2023, and I think it was a 42-day period, I believe. This occurred during the cold weather months of the year, when trail usage is historically down anyway, because the sun sets earlier, it's cold, there's usually snow and ice on the trail, et cetera. So historically, that's not a high period of usage for those trails. The second audit period was May or June of 2024. However, this was only a brief period. It was approximately a month period of time. And so I would question the duration of both of these audits and why we didn't look at this, or why the city didn't look at this for a longer period of time. They had the opportunity to look at this from essentially during the high season of usage from April to September, which I think would have given them a clearer picture. When I start looking at a threat assessment and I start looking at what the area looks like from a crime statistic purpose, I don't look at 1 month or 2 months. I look for blocks of time. I want to see what trends are there. That's the proper way to look at the nature of the threat. So I think the analysis of the period or the audits were too short, in my opinion. During the August 8th, 2024 council meeting discussing this issue, and we weren't here at that time to present our case, Commissioner Schur noted that the surveillance period was a small snapshot in time and that one event could skew the statistics, further noting that crime is not at all equal. And Commissioner Schur's comments were spot on. He recognized the issue with this audit. Chief Lyons noted during that same meeting that there was a crime spree in 2023, and since that time, the community has become more vigilant, I would agree, which has resulted in a double-digit reduction in property crime. What would the city's crime statistics look like if we took that particular month in 2023 and tried to paint the city's crime picture just using that 1 month? It'd be drastically different than looking at a longer period of time and didn't take into consideration the subsequent period of time that the chief has talked about, where the citizens have become more vigilant and they've seen a reduction in crime. But I think that's what the argument that the city's making when it comes to this proposed trail gate is these really short periods of time and trying to base a decision on that. And I don't think those snapshots in time reflect the true nature of usage of the trail. Chief Lyons stated that crime, at the same meeting, stated that crime itself is easy to measure. I would clarify that statement and note that reported crime is easy to measure. As the chief knows, and anyone who's done police work for a while, numerous crimes go unreported for a multitude of reasons, and those are often never accounted for statistically. Consequently, the fear of crime can seem disproportionate to reported crime statistics, particularly with the advent of social media, the sensationalizing of crime stories, and misleading information about criminal activity and sharing information about crimes that weren't reported to law enforcement, all via text messages, social media, etc. One aspect of crime that is so insidious is that it is very often random and unpredictable in nature, giving rise to one of the primary causes of the fear of crime. Property crimes tend to be crimes of opportunity. That's why your police department is consistently reminding the community to lock your doors, windows, activate your alarm systems. And when you take these simple steps, you are reducing the opportunities for a crime to occur or deterring the crime from occurring. As Mr. DeCidju said, we're trying to close the door after the park is closed or the trails have closed. Also keep in mind that people see signs of crime or behaviors that are frightening or concerning to them. For example, a homeless person talking to themselves, gang graffiti, a suspicious person in their neighborhood. Several months ago, I was on University Boulevard, and in broad daylight, I watched a guy get off his scooter, walk over to the brick wall near the entrance to the Buell neighborhood, and urinate on the wall. There are cars all over South University Boulevard. That behavior and disregard for the law is concerning and difficult to quantify, but it impacts people's perception of crime and safety in the community, and that's why statistics don't tell the whole story. The other aspect that, and when I reviewed the notes from the meeting that wasn't discussed, was the burglary that Mr. DeCidju was talking about that occurred in July of 2024 in Cherry Hills Park neighborhood. In that particular instance, the suspects entered Cherry Hills Park via the trail system, believe they came up from the South Trail and went onto the victim's property. They used a drain pipe to shimmy up to the second floor balcony, where they proceeded to break a window to the balcony door. And the owners of the home happened to be in their master bedroom at the time. Yelled at them. The suspects, at least 2 of them on the balcony, jumped over 15 feet down to the ground, met up with another party there, another suspect, and they ran north and quite likely got out of the neighborhood via that north trail. No one should be, thank goodness the suspects fled, but the incident created additional fear and concern in the Cherry Hills Park community on top of what happened in 2023. And rightfully so. No one should be dismissive of those fears or concerns because events like that are not commonplace. Ask someone whose home has been burglarized and how violated it made them feel, and it's terribly traumatic. They feel violated and they no longer feel safe in their home. The crime spree in 2023 prompted the community to hire me as a consultant and to take a second look at their security protocols and recommend changes. The Cherry Hills Park HOA has been proactive and implemented several recommended security changes at their own expense. The proposed gate is a deterrent to those individuals already violating the law by being on the trail after hours who might see an ungated trail entrance as an opportunity to venture into the Cherry Hills Park community onto their private property and perhaps engage in criminal activity. When closed, the gate conveys the message that the pathway is not open to use and you should not enter. When the gate is open during the prescribed times by ordinance, it is business as usual. Law enforcement and government talk frequently about the public and private partnership that is needed to make a community safe and secure. The Cherry Hills Park Homeowners Association is being proactive regarding the safety and security of their community. They're extending a hand in partnership with the city to work with them to address their safety concerns and offering to pay for the proposed gate. The gate proposal is entirely reasonable given the totality of the circumstances, and I respectfully ask the city to join in partnership with the Homeowners Association and approve the proposed gate project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Is that the conclusion? Do you have other?
Yes. I'd like to have some of our residents and board members make comments so you can appreciate their perspective as well.
So I think we're going to allow public comment, even though we don't normally do that, but we're sort of treating this like an application. And so anybody who wanted to make comments, either from your HOA or in favor or opposed, there is a sign-up sheet on the back table, and we would invite those people to sign up, and we'll have public comment from everyone at that time. I think that makes the most sense for this procedure. So is there anything else in terms of your presentation?
In closing, we want to work in partnership, as how Mr. Shugart emphasized. And we've proposed to absorb the cost. As far as the specifics of legality of who owns, we'll donate it to the city. It's prudent, it's proactive, it is a deterrent. We have experienced it real, not the stat that is referenced. We've experienced it. It's a prudent measure to lock the door. And so respectfully, I hope you appreciate where we're coming from. You'll hear from some other board members and residents. And I wish the problem was not so. I really do. It's just a shame that we're in an environment that's changed the way it has in Denver, Colorado. But I think it's really important to be cognizant. And as Mr. Shugart referenced, to adapt. And this is a very prudent adaptation that will not encroach on anybody's ability to use the trail. It will be done in a way that harmonizes with the trail, and it will only close during the hours by statute that you're not supposed to be on the trail. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, Yeah, does anyone have questions for the applicant, Mr. DeCidio or Mr. Shugart? Okay, Counselor Eber.
Thank you, Mayor.
Oh, and sorry, if I could just, before you start, I see you, if you would like to speak either in favor or opposed to this application, please sign up on the back table.
Describe to me, if you would, the process of going from the 3 gates to the 1 gate.
We wanted to move incrementally. Our preference would be to do the 3 gates. But in the spirit of partnership and moving in a measured way, we thought this would be the right incremental approach after studying it and getting some feedback.
So is it fair to say that in an incremental way means there will be a second and possibly a third phase application?
I can't comment on, I'm not clear in responding to that. I think a lot of it will be a byproduct of the environment. So to the extent that it will be a measured response to the environment. I think and let me steer back just one moment. I think what we did is we looked at where the most traffic was on the trail system. And it is in that area. There's an open access point on University, and you can access it through Colorado. So there's generally more traffic. I have a home that has cameras that surveil part of the trail on that north side, and we do notice activity in the summertime, particularly activity in the summertime. So that's long-winded response to your question. Sure. Sorry.
Mr. Shugart mentioned that there were a number of different proposals and things that the neighborhood has implemented. I was hoping you could tell me what some of those other ones are as well.
We've done everything from flock cameras, increased lighting, cameras. We have additional security guards, roaming security. We've put quite a bit of investment in getting this to a more secure environment.
Was there a specific security committee that was formed in response to this as part of a subcommittee of the HOA?
We did this collectively as a board. That was our committee. Our board studied it closely and retained Mr. Shugart's services to provide advice and counsel.
And were those HOA discussions manifested in minutes of an HOA meeting or some way to understand what the discussions were at the time and the presentations that were made to the HOA and the decisions made by the HOA?
I believe we have minutes, yes. Is there a question specifically that?
I'm just trying to understand the timing of what was done and when was done, when whatever was done, and the process that went through the HOA to find that there was an issue that you wanted to address.
Well, the process, the initial catalyst for the process was listening to Chief Lyons, maybe 2 years ago, right, approximately, in response to what we saw in the video. It was a wake-up call, a really clear, crystal clear wake-up call. And we took action. We took action collectively as a board. And at that point, we studied. And in conjunction with Mr. Shugart's suggestions, we put them into play as quickly as we could in response to that event. That event was the wake-up call for us.
Tell me, if you would, a little bit about the excuse me, Mr. Shugart.
If you could just come to the microphone because it's being streamed, and thank you.
You're on camera.
Yep. I saw. When Mr. DeCidio purchased the property at number 8, one of the first things that I did was look at an aerial map and recognize these trails. My experience as a burglary detective has led me to to recognize that that is a possible vulnerability. I can't tell you how many burglaries I've done where suspects have entered through a trail, a green belt, have come to, to the back of the home that way because they're generally able to do so undetected from the street. So I recognize this as a potential vulnerability, and I actually walked all these trails to understand where they went and the different access points. So I had a good, clear picture of what I was looking at just for his property, and then could begin designing the countermeasures and the things that we want to employ at his property alone.
Okay.
Mayor, I have 2 questions.
Some questions? Yes, Councilor Robinson.
Yes, does the HOA permit properties to be fenced? Are there some of you that have fences on your properties?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Was that incident in 23, did that occur in Cherry Hills Park?
The incident that was on camera?
Yes.
My understanding, Chief Lyons could speak better to this. I know on specifics, but I believe it was on Vista and Village Road. Is that correct, Chief?
Yeah, the news clip that you had related to the armed subjects here in the city was not in Cherry Hills Park. It was in a neighborhood right here off of Quincy, right behind us.
Now, with reference to that neighborhood, if you look on that slide, that road is adjacent to the right side of the slide from my perspective. It's the next road over. So it's a stone's throw away, where it took place.
Thank you.
If I can continue, tell me what efforts were there to coordinate the submittal with the people and the HOA of Buell Mansion?
Well, they're their own HOA, so we're not going to, they have, I can't tell you that we're meeting, I've had some discussions with their president, and I think they have, my understanding is, I think they voted recently for a roaming patrol on that area. I can't, it's a former mayor, I'm forgetting his name, I'm sorry. Who is it? Russ, excuse me, yeah, I met with Russ, and we talked about it. And I think in my observation, I think there's some constraints financially on what they want to absorb on cost. We're willing to absorb the cost.
Right. But the initial proposal of 3 gates was something initially put forward in conjunction with the discussions with Mr. Stewart?
They were supportive on the gate on the university side, yes. You see right there on that would be west. Right, you can see university. But it's, the focus of our process was, we're respectful that Buell is its own homeowners association, and we're not going to impose our view necessarily on what they want to do. But I believe, I don't want to speak for them, but in my conversations with Mr. Stewart, they were supportive.
You mentioned earlier about one event that happened in Cherry Hills Park, but you mentioned that the intruder came off of the south side of the trail for which you are not proposing to have a gate, is that correct?
It's not we're not proposing it at this moment, no.
I'm sorry, well, let's have you.
No, I'm not clear. We're not clear. Chief Lyons might be able to speak more clearly to this on the specifics, but they use the trail system as access points, both south and north.
And then a question that I have, maybe it is for Director Goldie, is my understanding that when Cherry Hills Park was platted, this trail was part of the original plat that was approved for the neighborhood?
Yes, this trail predates any construction of homes in the neighborhood.
So is it fair to say that every resident bought into the neighborhood with an understanding this trail would be there?
Yes.
And we're respectful of that, and we want open trails. So we're very respectful of that dynamic that you reference. It's about safety and responding to an environment that has clearly changed. So absent that dynamic, as Chief Lyons has emphasized, we want to lock the door. And I would prefer that we not be in this environment. I would prefer that we didn't have to rewatch that video. I would prefer that our neighbors were not broken into with 3 people that tried to break into their home, that they're still shaken where they don't want to discuss it on an open mic. We're respectful and recognizing of that change in environment.
And Mr. Sidgwick, I'm respectful of that as well. When you mentioned the event that happened previously, it is my understanding from looking at the video that that was a daytime event, not to diminish anything.
That was a nighttime event. That video was nighttime.
Are you referring to the subjects with the weapons?
Well,
The Vista Road incident.
The Vista Road incident that we saw here was at night.
Those were at night.
Now, the event that happened in Cherry Hills Park, though, my understanding is it was not 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.
It was night, and it was before 11 p.m.
Okay. So it would not necessarily have deterred, having the gate there would not have deterred necessarily this time, because there would not have been a closure at that point.
Not necessarily relative to that event. Look, we're not coming here saying you need to close the trail and the statute is the statute. We're just trying to lock that door. And we're paying attention. We're cognizant. We're responding to what's happening. So it's, and like I emphasized, we want to do it, we'd like to work in partnership, and it feels like this is the risk reward of this, is we're offering to pay for it. I think, as I've emphasized in the past, you can characterize it as a beta. If it's not going to encroach on people's use of the trail system, if it really doesn't work and there are all these problems that people potentially have articulated in some of the feedback I received, then we would do a trial period. You could take it out if there was legitimate issues on that front. But the safety component of what I'm referencing is hugely important, and it should override. That should be the paramount concern, in my humble opinion, and it is the paramount concern of this city. It's the first item, the first word that's emphasized in our charter and most of our mission statements. It's safety. So I don't think anybody can argue that the metropolitan environment, of which we are part of, we're 11 miles away from downtown. Look at recently, there was a shooting in Washington Park just a few days ago. There's a guy that ran around on the 16th Street Mall stabbing people. Unfortunately, there are bad actors that have populated the area. And the problem is real. And I think it would be imprudent to not recognize and adapt to that.
Was one of or were there any considerations as far as the additional measures, when you mentioned additional guards and roaming people, to place those people at different points along or throughout the evening along the trail itself as an alternative to the proposal?
We do have our security personnel we have them check the trail. They can only check it so often. And the realities are, this is expensive, and there's economics as well. And the cost, Chief Lyons, you can speak to the cost of a patrol officer. Security people, it's pretty expensive endeavor, even having the additional security personnel that we currently have.
Okay. I want to move on to the public comment. If there are no further questions, we give our citizens an opportunity to speak. So thank you very much.
Thanks for your questions.
For your presentation. Anyone else who has not had a chance to sign up? Okay.
Should we leave the map up?
I don't know that we need the map. I think we all get it. So again, you'll have 5 minutes to speak, and we just ask that everyone be respectful, direct your comments to the council. First up is Laura Chrisman, and then after Laura will be Carl Friedman, so you can be on deck.
Thank you. Good evening. Laura Chrisman, 18 Cherry Lane Drive. I'm going to address very quickly the charter amendment, since I wrote it. Leaving trails out of the leasing licensing provision was not an oversight. It was intentional. I did not, when I was writing this and talking to other people who were concerned about it, think that leasing or licensing uses of the trails was appropriate without going to the vote of the people. Where it was a lot more made sense was on the larger properties where there might be appropriate uses for a lease, a temporary lease, or a license. So I just wanted to clarify that point. It is my position that that does have to go to a vote. And it's not a vote that an applicant decides. It is the city council makes that decision to take it forward. Okay, so, but that's not actually what I was going to talk about. I came here to support the staff and position and Parks and Trails. I'm not going to reiterate what they said, but as you guys know me, many people know me, I research things. And one of the things I researched was something called, sorry, put my glasses on, premises liability. And that is the liability associated with failure to provide security that people believe that they are entitled to. And it's a real thing. So let me talk a little bit about the gates. And I went to a legal resource on the internet, and I just found some of the things this gentleman said interesting. I'm just going to read you a few of the quotes. The main purpose of a gate on a low-crime property is not to deter or prevent crime, but to provide a perception of security and exclusivity. Gates can, in fact, be a barrier to emergency services. And that's important here because we know that occasionally there can be fires. There can be fires in trees, on trails, arising from fireworks. The fire department would need to get back there. This may or may not be their quickest way. People on a trail may have a heart attack, may need emergency services. So let me go to my concern in that regard. Swinging gates, this is a quote, are a nightmare to maintain, unquote. If a gate becomes damaged and requires repair, sometimes weeks away, and for those of us who went to a recent HOA for Temple Buell, they are waiting and waiting and waiting for parts for repair. So while you're waiting, what do? Do you leave it open or do you leave it closed? What if you don't even know it's not working? If you have a duty, and the city would have a duty to keep that thing closed at night and open in the morning, then you have liability for failure to follow through on that duty. The city assumes obligations and duties and liability all of the time. But generally, you weigh that liability. This liability to keep this community safe. Safe, I think it was said safe, safe, and safe. You have a duty now, if you install that gate, to keep them safe. And they've been very clear, that's your duty. So generally, when you undertake a really important duty, you do it in the balance of what is for the whole community. This is an undertaking not for the whole community. It is for a small part of the community. And if it applies to this community, then maybe it applies to the whole community. Then you undertake that duty for the whole community. I just would caution you against that. I think that we've had trails in Cherry Hills for a long time. They're an important part of our community, and I would not like anything to interfere with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Carl Friedman, and then after Carl is, I apologize if I don't say your name, is it Barbita? Barbita? Oh, that's right, Barbita Witt. So you're next. Thank you. Oh, White, okay. Let me put it, that's okay. White, okay.
Hi there. My name is Carl Friedman. I live at 10 Cherry Hills Drive, right across from the property that we're talking about. And I use that trail quite a bit. I've used all these trails for 47 years while I was in Cherry Hills. I was one of a half a dozen people, along with Harriet Lemaire, that founded the Highline Canal Conservancy. I spent probably 8 years on the Planning and Zoning, and another probably 8 years on the Board of Adjustment. And that's where I want to go back to in history of this initiation of Cherry Hills Park Drive. In the 90s, Buzz Coble wanted to merge 3 properties here that is now Cherry Hills, part of his Cherry Hills Park. He had 20 acres, I believe, that was the tennis courts of the Cherry Hills Country Club that was on the east side of University. His dad had a partnership amongst many of the club members, had another 20 acres, and then he had some rights, I guess, temporary rights, to perhaps acquire the Buell property. And what he was proposing was this one property, a gate, fence, walls around it, and that would be the thing. And basically, if you think about it, from all the way from Hampton down to almost where the elementary school is, would have been gated off. And this was totally foreign to everything that I ever anticipated in Cherry Hills, with all the trails, the Highline Canal, and what have you. He was going to gate it off with no access to anybody else. Okay, he got turned down. I was one of the members that voted it down, but it was pretty unanimously voted down. And we permitted him to go ahead and merge the 2 properties, the 20 acres tennis courts, 20 acres his dad's property, together, with the one caveat that there were going to be trails that ran through the property. The property would not have been permitted to be developed without those. He wasn't pleased with that, but he had no choice. And he had no choice about doing that. And so what we're looking at here is a situation where it was agreed upon by the developer and by homeowners who had full knowledge of this to change the situation. And we're talking about Vista Road. Vista Road, you could drive cars up and down. There is no way of accessing Cherry Hills Park by car unless you're permitted to. To get to this gate that they're talking about, and then further getting into the property, you'd have to walk from, I don't know where you'd park the car. There's nowhere to park your car on University. Maybe at the elementary school, maybe over here. They could park it. They could walk about a half a mile toward toward this particular trail. And then there's probably about a mile and a half of walking that would require someone to get to someone's house, steal something, and have it small enough that they could put it in their pocket and walk another mile and a half, and then recover their car, perhaps, over at the police department or at the school or what have you. So we're talking about, this is a gated community. If you walk through there, I don't know whether most of the houses are gated, but a substantial amount of these houses are gated. The property is gated. There's no car access. There's not a safety issue. I live across the street that's not gated, and I've never, ever felt danger in Cherry Hills. Whether I used to live not far from where you live, I lived on basically Quincy and Dahlia. I had 2 homes there, never felt any danger. My kids grew up there, and I live across the street. It's not gated, and the homes are just as valuable. People are just as concerned about something bad happening, but it's not gated. So I suggest that this is a problem that there's no problem here, 1. And 2 is that basically this park would not have existed if they did not permit some access by other people into this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbita White, and after Ms. White is Mark Mick something.
Well, hi, I'm Barbita White, and I live at 4 Cherry Hills Park Drive. And I want to put a face to all these numbers. I actually live right on the corner of where the trail is on the north side and also where it bisects our neighborhood. So I have it on 2 sides of my property. And I do appreciate the history lesson, but the problem that we are not interjecting into history is present day. And the present day reality is that Denver has changed. I wish it would not have changed, but there is undeniably a higher level of criminal activity. How do we know that? The videos. How do we know that? You hired more people. You have a K-9 division. So we clearly have a problem. So to say that there's not a problem, I don't think is a valid conversation. Our neighborhood has about 22 houses currently. And there's been more break-ins than has been reported to the police. It's a very private neighborhood, and not everyone wants to put, as they would say, the young people put on blast what has happened to them and their family. Since the last 2 years, I know of 3 burglaries that have taken place. A neighbor's passports were stolen out of their property. The property across from mine had her fence on both sides, because she's like mine, so her trail's on the north side, and then the bisection. Both sides of her fence were pried open so that you could have easy access in and out of her property. When they did that, they cut my Christmas lights so that you couldn't see them doing that, because I have up a lot of Christmas lights. So it's not a statistic, it's real people. Why are we here today? Yes, when that park was created, or that neighborhood was created, yes, everyone, whoever was there, knew that you're going to have an open trail system there. But when the properties were initially created, we didn't have this crime rate. We're not trying to close down the trail. We're just trying to make ourselves feel more secure at night. We're only asking for what is lawful in terms of, let's just lock the door at the time that no one can access those trails. Why is that so hard to ask for? In your guiding principles, it says on the principle number 1, the preservation, enhancement, and improvement of public and private areas of the city, including streets, streetscapes, trails, and open spaces, should emphasize a pastoral, safe, serene, and open character. Where is the safety? I love the trail system. I use it all the time. But unfortunately, criminals have decided to weaponize it. So are we supposed to act as if it's not something that criminals can access to do damage to people's properties, to make them fearful? My security system is on all the time, whether I'm in the house or out of the house. I never felt that way 3 years ago, but I do now because of the increase in crime. Our neighborhood has been here how many years? Decades. Has this request ever been made before? Absolutely not. There was no necessity, no reason for it. But with this increased crime, and yes, there's a fear factor that you cannot have in statistics, it helps us to feel more safe in our neighborhood. Another thing that hasn't been brought up is that there is an international crime ring that targets wealthy communities. Russell Wilson's head of security and his whole team told me about it 3 years ago when there was a break-in across the street. I can't remember that neighborhood, right beside Cherry Hills Country Club. And he says that there is an international crime ring that targets very wealthy neighborhoods. And so we are in a unique position. That trail system cuts through our entire neighborhood, cutting it off. We're a circle. And in between that circle, in the middle, is the trail system, which we all use and we all love and we all enjoy. But it also gives access to criminals, and we cannot act as if it doesn't. And the other thing is we are right there where University is. There is a bus line right there. And a lot of people come through Cherry Hills Village and are transported through that bus line that is right there at University, right where our entrance is. And so I just don't know what the problem is. If it's going to be safe, then how do we make it safe? We're saying, okay, we will fund the bill for that. We as neighbors just want to feel safe in our communities, safe in our neighborhoods. Would I have bought that property with this crime? No, because I have a son and I'm right there on that corner and I do not feel safe. Right? You don't live where I live. You don't live.
Sorry.
You don't
Just
live-
direct your
you don't
comments.
live- I'm sorry, on the trail. I'm on the trail and both sides of this trail. And so that's my concern. There's 22 houses. In the last 2 years, there's been 3 burglaries. There's been property damage that has been done that's not being reported nor talked about. And so I just want you to understand that these are real people with real children, with real concerns. And again, I love the trail. I wish it wasn't this way, but it is. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to call you Mark. And after Mark is, I believe, is it Young Yoon?
Hello, I'm Mark McCammon. Live
Got
at
it.
3 Cherry Hills Park.
I see that now.
Our neighbor to the west. And so we back to the trail on the north side, not far from where the gate would be. My wife and I are there. We have a 1-year-old and a newborn, and so we are a new family. We experienced, before we moved into Cherry Hills Park, we lived in Hilltop, and in Christmas Eve of 21, we were broken into. Yeah, sure. And I guess I would ask all you, have any of you had your house broken into? Yeah. And it's not good. And so we were 6 months more in that house, and my wife hated that house after we got broken into. And it ruins people's perceptions of their home. And we've had, as Richard suggested, we've had people in our community where their homes, their sense of home, not their house, but their home has been ruined by crime. And there's at least one party that's sold and left Cherry Hills Park because of stuff that has happened. They left. And for how nice Cherry Hills Village is and how nice Cherry Hills Park is supposed to be and how safe it's all supposed to be, it's to have any risk that our homes can be ruined by external crime. It's not a good thing. And fear is a terrible thing for families to experience. And it's an awful thing for me to have a wife who has more fear than she should living in Cherry Hills Park. And so, Robert, you had asked, what all have we done? We've done everything we can do to try and create a comprehensive security strategy. I'm vice president on the board along with Richard. Taken a lot of steps. This is supposed to be an additional incremental step that ideally would serve as a part of a comprehensive plan to keep us as safe as possible. When we had our meeting with basically the entire neighborhood after that video came out, I surveyed that room. There was a lot of fear in that room. And it's just not what our community we should have. We should be taking steps to mitigate people's fear. I mean, that's the safety component. When I've listened to the arguments as to, well, what could be the negatives of this proposal going forward, they don't really resonate. If you talk about somebody could be confused as to whether or not the trails are open, clearly we have people confused now whether they are open after 11 p.m. I'm not up after 11 p.m. very often, but when I am, I have seen people behind walking. I don't necessarily think that they were always doing something nefarious. But they're not supposed to be there. They don't know that they're not supposed to be there. We don't have an issue right now where the community is certain as to what that, information set suggests. So putting in something new I think it would give us an opportunity to further educate when it's allowed, when it's not. Signage would be fine. And I think so I don't really think that it's not a convincing argument to me that you could confuse the public based on whether it would be open or not. We can take steps to do that. So if I'm thinking about this vote, who are the beneficiaries to vote it down? I don't see any beneficiaries in voting this down. I don't see one single member of the community that's going to benefit from this proposal not going forward. We will benefit with peace of mind and deterrent and an incremental component to our security program if it does go forward. And I understand there are legal considerations around, what is the phrase, lease is not really an appropriate word for this. We are happy to just give pay for it and give the gate. We're not trying to lease land. We're not trying to stake something into the ground. That is a legal argument to try and derail the spirit of what's trying to be accomplished here. This is just a very small safety measure to benefit part of the community without a cost to the community. So it's going to be hard for us. It's going to be hard for me to go home and explain to my wife, well, it got voted down. What was the reason? I won't logically be able to explain that because it doesn't make much sense to me. But thank you for all the work you do. You guys don't have an easy job. We appreciate it and appreciate you.
Thank you. Young Yoon, and then after is it Phillips?
Hi, my name is Young Dan Yoon. I'm a neighbor at 22 Cherry Hills Park, a board member as well. I think everybody's said everything pretty clearly, but I want to reemphasize a few items. The locking of the door, that seems pretty obvious to me, and I'm going to just kind of paint a picture. It's like this is a public facility. It's like a museum or a school. After hours, they lock the door. They don't just put a sign on the door saying it's closed and not lock the door. They lock the door. And that's all we're doing. We're just locking the door, just following the rules. So I want to just rebut a few items that the lady had brought up earlier. So the fire truck, so first of all, that possibility is so unlikely, but if it does happen, we've had situation in our own neighborhood where the fire truck just runs through the gate. Doesn't matter whether, they don't get out trying to figure out how to open it. Doesn't happen. They just run right through it. It's not an issue, not an issue. Parts being back ordered and you can't get parts to open the gates, to fix the gates, just leave it open. If a part is missing, it's taking a long time, leave it open. These are silly arguments.
I'm sorry, just keep your comments directed to me. Thank you.
I'm sorry, these are silly arguments. The point is that the door needs to be locked. That's the point. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Kit Phillips.
I don't have a lot to add.
I'm sorry, state your name and address for the record.
Kit Phillips, 17 Cherry Hills Drive, Park. I don't have a lot to add other than I want to emphasize, and I think it's really important, this whole issue boils down to common sense. And we've heard all the problems, we know all the issues. We've got a situation where this is not lawful from 11 to 6 a.m. to be on the path. And all we're asking for is the right to protect our houses. And that's all I really have to say. I think we need to really, really use common sense here. We've got a new town, new problems. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes our public comment. Mr. DeCiccio, did you want to make a comment?
I just want to, there were some great points brought up, thank you. And I just want to create clarity for the council on that, because we investigated the items that were brought up. As far as gates and the functionality of gates, I personally have had a gate for 20 years, no problem. The gate's default option, if there is any, this would be powered by electricity. If there is no electricity, the gate's default is to open. All of the gate systems work like that. As far as emergency vehicles, all emergency vehicles, Chief Lyons, you could probably attest to this, have a key. It's a universal key that all the gate systems work with. So any gate on any property, some of you might have gates on your property. There's a default that the emergency people can access a key that they can use. The swinging gate, I'm not clear, I've had no problems with a swinging gate, but if there is a problem, you have our word, my word, it will be fixed the next day. But the default of it would be for it to be open. So if it's not working, it's just open. That's the reality on that. And we're not, somebody referenced, we're not looking to gate the area. That's not what this is. That's not what it's about. We love the trail system. Everybody has spoken to it. We just want to be prudent in recognition of what's been outlined. It's not about property values. It's not about any of that. It's about the core safety dynamic that we want to be attentive to. So it's just responding to the inputs. That's just wanted to highlight in response to some of the observations. But thank you again, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, council. I think we'll just start with a little bit of discussion and kind of see where people are. Does anybody want to start us off? No, I'm happy. Okay, Councilor Holen, or Mayor Pro Tem Holen, sorry.
Well, I come at this from the perspective that generally the obligation of a counselor is to assist its constituents with a need or request, so long as it doesn't materially conflict with an overarching priority or principle of the city or infringes upon another constituent's rights. Now, as has been stated, our public trails are a priority, and maintaining them as a public resource is a principle under the master plan. But that said, here we are talking about one gate on a trail that bifurcates a gated community. We only have 3 gated communities in the village: Glenmore, Cherry Hills Park, and the Buell. Glenmore doesn't have any trails going through that. The Buell and Cherry Hills Park do. And they have trails that bifurcate the security of that gated community. So from that perspective, I can distinguish, and I think that's really what this is going to boil down to, is do we view the bifurcation of a gated community as a, oh, by the way, or is it a material difference between all of the other trails in our community? 25 miles of trails, and this is a half mile. The 25 miles are different than this half mile or the other way around. So when I put this next to Cherry Hills Park's community's desire to increase the security of that gated community, from that balancing perspective, I can get my head around supporting this request. Now, as for whether Cherry Hills Park's desire for increased security is warranted, that really is a subjective judgment. I believe that our police department under Chief Lyons has increased the safety of our community significantly, and that is significantly from a level that was already one of the safest communities in Colorado. Would I have a concern if I was a Cherry Hills Park resident? Probably not. But what I would have a concern about is irrelevant, and as Ms. White so eloquently stated and passionately stated, it's the judgment of that Cherry Hills Park community. Is that they want to increase the security level of the community beyond what they've already significant things that they've done. Now, with regard to some of the comments that have been made, again, we've already talked about it. The master plan talks about a safe, serene, low-density community. And it does talk about the preservation of our public trails and private areas, but that they should emphasize a pastoral, safe, serene, and open character. We've got a couple, those things are in conflict a little bit there, safe and open. And I used that word once before about the tension that exists between conflicting things. I used that the wrong way one time, but I'm using it this time. Sometimes those come into tension. From our police strategic plan, community policing stresses prevention, which has also been talked about. This is a preventative measure in my mind. Now, the perception that the trail is private. I don't know whether that's real or not, but even if it is, if someone thinks a trail is private, why wouldn't they think that if it's walled on all sides and barriers, but that if it's open with a wide trail, that they wouldn't just walk in it anyway? I don't know. I mean, it's a point, I can't really talk about that. But I compare that with private security on our public streets, which could also provide the perception that those streets are private. And I know that that perception does exist. I know, for example, there's a 24-hour patrolling security guard in Cherry Hills Farms. And I know because I've been there and people have said to me, are these streets private? And I go, no, these are public streets. That doesn't seem to prevent folks from walking those streets. Now, the HOA has been attentive to the concerns raised by staff and modified their proposals accordingly. They've gone from 1 gate to 3. And as I've said, it's 3 to 1, sorry. And I view it very differently in terms of those trails that bifurcate a gated community. You know, so for instance, that trail that sits there on University, that's a totally different situation in my mind. You know, they've said they'll go to electric power versus the solar to ensure that there's continuous electricity going. The gates are open. If there's an issue, they'll have guards checking to make sure that those gates are open every day or closed at the appropriate times. There's a Knox box to ensure the emergency access. You know, they're willing to cede ownership to the city if that's the only way to do it. You know, some of the concerns that have been made, the slippery slope argument. I've said this to people before, and I know people, I don't buy the slippery slope argument. I've heard it, we've heard it for all of the contentious issues in our country. I think it's crap. It's cowardice by people that don't want to make decisions. If this makes sense, and you know people that are then going to come and say, oh, you've got to give it to me, and you don't have the ability to stand up and go, no, in this case, it doesn't fit. This is different. I don't buy that slippery slope. I never have. Someone said, hey, don't close the trails. We got some comments that said don't close. We're not talking about closing the trails, plural. We're talking about this one trail. Someone made a comment about the gates around access points to the High Line. This isn't an access point to the High Line. I mean, the High Line's down the road. It's a trail that connects to a trail that connects to the High Line. Someone said, hey, you're adding gates to our bridle paths. Well, we're not really doing that. And as for some of the potential operational problems, I think it's clear that they can be addressed and can addressed adequately, particularly if Cherry Hills Park means what they say, which is that they're going to do whatever it takes from a financial perspective to ensure that we don't deprive our citizens of the ability to access those trails. So the residents of the park, Cherry Hills Park, desire to enhance the security of their gated community by installing 1 gate at the north end of the city that bifurcates that community. They'll take steps to ensure that the gate's always open at 6 and closes no early at 11. They'll pay for all of this as well as fund a maintenance account or turn it over to the city to make sure that it's always maintained. So while some of our residents might perceive that the trail has been privatized, I don't think it would actually prevent anyone from using that trail during the hours they're legally permitted to do so. So as such, I'm willing to approve the park's request to do this, although we've heard some conversations we may not actually be, if you were to go in that direction, approving the request as we'd be directing staff to engage, to come up with an agreement that based on the restrictions of the charters and the ordinances that reflect the terms and conditions that have been proposed. I've got confidence that we can do that working with our esteemed city attorney. Again, I'm just not quite certain how it would go, but I think it could be done in a manner that accomplishes our objectives. But I just don't know exactly what that would look like right now. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Heller.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to pick up where I started before and just kind of get a view from you, Chief. You know, what does this do from a security perspective? Does it, you know, help? And I recognize fully that there's a psychological safety part to this. I think was talked about, and definitely a benefit there. But in terms of physical security,
Sure. Well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't extend a thank you to Mr. DeCidio, Hal, and really the entire community. The fact that you would show up here and talk about vigilance and talk about safety, it is, to Mr. DeCidio's point, is everything that I stand for, and you've heard me say that before. What the core component of true community policing is both sides, right? It's the police and the community. And we work in conjunction and partnership with one another to identify and mitigate concerns. So the fact that you're here, the fact that you are standing up for what you believe in, thank you for that. And I don't know who did the PowerPoint, Hal, I'm guessing that might have been you or somebody, but thank you for identifying the one thing that I say in every meeting, is that there is crime in Cherry Hills Village. To suggest that there is not would simply be naive. And to Ms. White's point, yeah, it's tough to measure crime that hasn't happened. So I do put an emphasis on statistics because that is the metric that I have. But more important to me than a crime statistic is how you feel about your neighborhood. And I've said this before, and I mean this with all sincerity. It bothers me. I take it personally if there is one resident in this city that doesn't feel safe in their home. I feel as though if that is the case, that's the perception, I'm failing you. But the truth is, Colorado is number 8 in the United States in terms of persons crime. We have 0 persons crimes here in Cherry Hills Village. It is number 4 in the country in property crime. And statistically, again, the only metric that I have, we're a remarkably safe community. In fact, to Hal's initial comment, we are double-digit decreased from 23 into 24. And the reality is the additional police officers we put on the street, the addition of canine officers was not in response to increased crime. It was to be proactive so that that rate doesn't increase, to give you a greater sense of safety and security, not in response to an increase in incidents. Crime is not up in Cherry Hills Village. In fact, it's down significantly. But I have to acknowledge that one crime is too many. In particular, one crime in a community is felt not only by the victim or the homeowner, but by the entire community. And so we strive to provide the absolute best service we can. And I'll say to you, council, the same thing I told the PTRC, is I don't have a strong stance on the gate as a construct. My stance is on crime. And what does crime look like here in Cherry Hills Village, both historically and kind of moving forward. And I mentioned the double-digit decrease, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the support that you've shown the police department, both financial opportunities and the increase in staff and understanding our 5-year strategic plan. And I guess I'm pleased that many of the examples in the applicant's PowerPoint are a year or more old. That's a good thing, right? That we're not talking about something that happened last week because many of our strategies are working. So I guess I just wanted to say that and to answer your specific question. You know, security is in crime prevention is a layered response. And I think any practitioner would tell you the more layers, the greater the security. Either a physical, actual decline in mechanism of crime, or, as has been mentioned a few times, to increase the sense of safety and security. And sometimes those barriers will do those things. I don't know. I can't predict that a gate would prevent all crime from occurring in the city. Certainly, or in their community. Certainly, the one instance that we had with the transnational crime ring that struck this summer in their community, those suspects scaled to the second floor. A fence, a gate wouldn't stop that. But on the same token, none of us have a crystal ball. And again, if we continue with the thought process that security is layered, the more layers, in essence, the greater the sense of security. However, this isn't really about that particular gate preventing crime. As I sit here and I sort of deconstruct all of the comments, I think the greater issue does it increase a sense of safety and security in the people that live there, and that's a question for you to answer. But I'm happy to talk about what we are seeing in terms of crime, how much crime has occurred as a result of access from a trail, and those kinds of things. But I just wanted to make my point clear. It would be probably inappropriate for me to take a hard stance and then Murphy's Law come visit me as it normally does next week. So,
Thank you, Chief. Another question
Yes, of
for
course.
Director Goldie. If I'm on the right trail, I think farther to the east and on the north side, the Buell does have access right through the street, and then you walk up around and you can get to their private pond and the like. So wouldn't that be logical to be gated as well? They're a gated community as well. It's open to the same trail farther to the east, if I'm remembering.
It's actually just north of
Directly north. And there is an agreement that during open hours, of course, anybody that wants to go out the front gate or in the front gate can as a trail user.
On foot.
On foot. Or bike.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Eber.
I want to get to a question, and many of you already know me. Many of you who don't know me, I'll tell you, I'm born and raised in the village, so I feel like I know a lot of the history. And then my sister used to ride her horse where your homes are now. Question that I have, and my understanding of the trails is, we historically were a community that did not have hours on our trails. And that it has only been more recently, and largely in part because of parks, not necessarily trails, that we didn't want people congregating in them after hours. And then we came up with a set of hours. And I just want to confirm kind of that idea, that it was more with the idea of parks than it was with respect to trails.
I would have to look into that. Our hours more were based on South Suburban's regulations overall in the district, and we adopted those when we took back over the parks. So the hours that we've had were more of a historic, what South Suburban had put on their trails, as far as I know, because they haven't changed in the 20-plus years that I've been here.
So we never affirmatively came up with our determination that we didn't want people on. It was just a adoption of a previous South Suburban type of hours.
Yes, and those hours, in conjunction with South Suburban, were codified in our code.
Right. And if somebody were on the trails today at 11:10 p.m. or 5:30 a.m., what would we do with those people if they were, let's say, taking a walk?
Sure. So your question is, if someone were on the trail or in a park in those prohibited hours, and somehow we were made aware of that, came across them, and there was a contact that was made. The first response would be to find out if they had some justified reason to be there, right? It's sort of just prima facie as to whether a code was violated. As an example, in many of the cases, in fact, all of the cases that were documented during our audit, those were generally teenagers going from one house to another who live in Cherry Hills Village. We had people that were walking their dogs even after 11 o'clock at night, and one young lady pushing a stroller, those kinds of things. We would want to evaluate from a reasonable person's perspective. That's the standard. Is there a reason to be there? Not that it somehow justifies the fact that the code was violated, but are they there to conduct some sort of criminal activity? That's going to be our first response. Generally, if it's a neighbor, we're going to admonish, issue a verbal warning, and get down the road. Worst case scenario is that it's a municipal code violation and we write such a summons for that. But generally speaking, we're trying to mitigate the issue and not take a heavy-handed approach to a neighbor using the trail behind their home.
One of the things that I want to follow up on is, I'm aware of a number of village residents that have 8 o'clock jobs to get to in the morning, and frequently they are running our trail system before 6 o'clock. And, I think what I've heard from you saying is, number one, not all people on the trails 11 to 6 are bad people. And number two, we try to do something about it to figure out what's going on so that and this gate would treat everybody the same, and that is, you're not on the trail, whether you're good or bad. Okay. The other question I have is, while we may have adopted that and may have it in our code, a question that I think our city attorney would look at is, let's say you have somebody in the village who works 3rd shift and is up through the evening and decides that they want to go out and run or walk or use our public trail system. And their taxes go to those trails, and they are denied an opportunity to make use of that trail. If this trail in particular, or others that, with respect to my fellow Councilor Holen, I am a firm believer in the sliding effect, slippery slope, because I can name the neighborhood at Buell. I can name the neighborhood that is off of Bellevue and west of Holly, west of Dahlia.
Old Charlevoix-ish, or?
Well, I can name Old Charlevoix, but I can name a number of village trails that go through very prestigious neighborhoods that would love to petition the city to do something exactly like this.
Not gated.
No, I think that they could petition to close gates on trails throughout the village.
Oh, I know they could.
And I think that it would have the same impact. It might not bifurcate a particular neighborhood, but we have numbers of trails that go right through residential areas. So that slippery slope, to me, is very real. That doesn't minimize what this application is after. And the idea of security and safety is not lost on me. But my question to you is, I think our residents that have a right to use this trail are being precluded from using a trail if it's flat out gated. That's my legal opinion. If we ever get to a situation where somebody's issued a summons and they choose to challenge it, they may win, they may not win. But that's, to me, one of the things that I, as a counselor, have to think about. Am I approving something that takes away a right, as Councilor Holen said, that as a result of granting this type of item?
So just so I'm clear, from an enforcement perspective, I just want to put your mind at ease. The prohibition from anyone using that trail in this particular case, because it's gated, my understanding from the applicant is the gate would be closed, thereby access denied in the hours that nobody should be on the trail anyway. So I don't believe it's prohibiting anybody that has a lawful right to be on the trail at a time that is lawful for them to be there.
I'll flip my lawsuit and tell you that the lawsuit is then against the village for prohibiting that person from accessing trails to which they have believe that they have a legal right to use.
Well, certainly every community that I've ever worked in has a prohibition against open space, parks and trails and certain prohibited hours. What you're suggesting is that we might have to change the code, which would be up to council and our legal staff. We have an existing code that prohibits trail use from 11 at night to 6 in the morning, gated or otherwise. The trail is prohibited. I just want to make sure that from an enforcement perspective, that would be an element that would need to be met for an action to occur from the.
And that's civil enforcement, though. It's not a criminal enforcement.
No, it's right. It's a code enforcement violation, municipal violation, not criminal in nature.
Okay. What I would like to comment in, and I appreciate, one of our community members is raising their hand. I'd love to take your question, but we're just not allowed to right now. I'm not allowed to interact with you directly, nor have you. So I apologize that I'm not going to be able to engage with you right now. Where I'm going with this is I believe it's our job as counselors to look at what I am hearing, and the words that I've been hearing from the applicant and the members of the community is, this makes us safer, this makes us. And our job up here is to think of a bigger us than just Cherry Hills Park. And so I say, okay, well, what's really going on here beyond the benefit that could be happening to Cherry Hills Park and the perception of a safety issue? Statistically, I'm hearing layers, I'm hearing that everything kind of helps. But I guess my question is, Chief, why don't we have 7 police dogs and a policeman on every corner, and everything else that goes on is, I believe your answer is going to be, it's resources, and we have to make choices somewhere and balancing things along the way. And I would love to be in a world where things don't exist, that sometimes turn out bad. But my question is it the village's responsibility to guarantee safety? And I don't think that we're A, able to, and B, should be able to guarantee that. And we're allowed to do what I think is the reasonable, what is best for the whole village. And I think that when I look at this and the slope that it becomes, well, forget about the slope. What it means to me for this right here is, do you have a safe neighborhood that needs additional things? We would all like additional prudent things. I look at what is the flip side of the offsetting value is, our trail system is what this place was founded upon. It's our #1 amenity, and I'm not saying it's more important than safety. If I had a real safety problem, this would be a really different balancing, but I just don't know that we are at the point where the precedential value, as well as, forget precedential, somebody can't come into that trail, forget about whether they ought to be there or not, but the trail system in Cherry Hills Village is our sacrosanct item, that putting a limitation makes me feel like the movies that I see where they have the parks in England that are the privatized parks, that you need a key for the neighborhood to get into. And if there's anything that I say that Cherry Hills Village isn't, it's that. And so for me to say that we have a safety problem that merits a major change to the philosophy of our open spaces, I'm just not there. I know many of you have fences around your property. I'm not sure that I want to turn around and say to your community, everybody should be gated, and then come talk to me. But at the same time, I'm also not in my role as the best for the whole community. I have to look at average levels of fear and reasonable levels of fear, not extraordinarily, I feel for the people who have been broken into. I'm not minimizing that. But I have to govern for the masses here. And I'm not sure that I'm at the point to see the massive offset. So I'll close and defer to others. If I have something else, I'll come back, but.
Yeah,
Mayor, can I make a comment?
Yes, please do.
So first of all, I want to thank the citizens who came forward. Very professional presentation, lots of preparation into this. And I share your concerns about crime in the community. It's something in my neighborhood. I live just down University a little ways, that my neighbors are very concerned about, so much so that we, as an HOA, voted to put in cameras this last year. So it is an issue. And so I'm sensitive to that. But I also Like Rob and unlike Earl, I think there is such a thing as precedent. And I'm concerned about the precedent of establishing a gate. I know in my community, I would have many that would say, why don't we do that here? Or why don't we do that there? And one, as Rob has very eloquently pointed out, our huge amenity of Cherry Hills is the trails and the open space. And so where I'm coming from with this is that I think that our police has done a fantastic job of keeping us safe, and I expect will do so. If that changes, I would ask you to come back, and maybe we should approve this, and maybe we need gates throughout the city. But I don't feel that we're at that point yet, and I'm not willing to sacrifice that open nature, and I'm very sensitive to the concern of fear. I don't like to hear that you have fear about your children and about your family. But I think it sets a precedent that is not in keeping with the master plan and at this time. But I would be open, if things change, to reconsidering that.
Mayor, could I ask, because this is a bit of a discussion, I want to ask Councilor Robinson and Councilor Evers. And I think everything you said, I understand that completely. And what you're saying is that you don't distinguish, the distinguishing characteristic between this trail that bifurcates Cherry, and you're absolutely, I said that, the trail that bifurcates the Buell, you do not distinguish anything or very, very little between those two trails and all the other trails that exist in the village.
I believe that our citizens will not make that distinction. That if we pass this, they will think, why not security, extra security in a trail on my trail. I don't think that, I understand, and I think it's a, interesting distinction, but I don't think the average citizen will make that distinction.
Councilor Fisher?
Thank you. I don't have much to add other than to add my thanks to the community members from Cherry Hills Park neighborhood, but also to just call out our volunteers on PTRC and the work that they did, because the packet was very thorough, and Director Goldie and your staff. So precedent was the word I had written down. So going last, I don't have much to add, but thank you.
Well, you're not quite last. I just wanted to say that I wanted to acknowledge a few things. First of all, I want to acknowledge the trauma that individual victims have felt and experienced, and what it brings to the entire community, having been part of this community through, a shooting of a police officer. It is absolutely real, and it is very difficult, very painful, and I want everybody to know that it is real. I also want to say that it's true that an open public trail through a neighborhood is a vulnerability. It's just a fact. We do have trails throughout our community, and I think for ages and even in our current master plan, our residents overwhelmingly have said that is a vulnerability they are willing to accept for this type of community they live in. I want to acknowledge that I too agree that from an operational standpoint, I think this could be figured out. Mr. DeSiggio, you said, you would guarantee that it would be fixed tomorrow, and I got to tell you, I know you, I believe you. If something were to break, it'd be fixed. So those aren't the issues here. I think what's challenging is that we're talking about emotions, and we're talking about feelings, and we're talking about how people are dealing with that. What I want to also add into the mix, though, is how I understand the feeling of safety versus actual safety, right? And those are related, but not the same. But I also want to acknowledge the feelings of the community when they see a trail that has a gate on it. It does. There are people, my daughter's lived here her entire life and still thinks that Cherry Hills Farm is a gated community because there's a security guard sitting at the front. She does not feel welcome to go into that neighborhood because she thinks it's a private neighborhood. There is a trail that, or there's a gate on a trail that Director Goldie mentioned at Charleau that's a private trail, and it looks private. And it looks so private that it was on the trail map. And when I was on Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission years ago, people protested because it looked private. Well, it turns out it looks private because it is private. So there are feelings to be contended with on all sides of the issue. It is extremely challenging, and safety is absolutely the top priority in this community, but our parks, trails, and open space is a very close second. So with that being said, I would entertain a motion from council. Oh yeah, can we get the...
I move to deny the request from the Cherry Hills Park HOA to install a gate on the city's trail system.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Councilor Heller, was that an aye? Yes. All those opposed? Nay. There's one opposed and 4 in favor. 2 meetings in a row. You're getting to be a salmon, Earl. Thank you to the community. I'm sorry, I know that wasn't the outcome you were hoping for. All right. The next item is reports. For the mayor's report, I don't have a report this evening. We'll start down here. Councilor Fisher.
No report, thanks.
No report.
No report.
No report. None here either.
Oh, that was easy. All right, moving on to city manager.
Yeah, before the directors offer their reports, I'll just say we did have this week, actually last Friday, our financial consultant is fully on board, was in this afternoon actually, and I would say fully engaged. And I'm looking to the staff because everybody's working with her and her staff to ensure that we have a smooth transition until we have a new finance director, and maybe even a little overlap there as well to help the new finance director get up to speed. With that said, staff is progressing extremely quickly. We have first round interviews this Thursday and Friday with 10 finance director candidates. So yes, it's a first round, and we will likely whittle that down to a much more manageable second round, which will then provide a more in-depth opportunity to interview sort of the candidates that rise above the rest. So we have a lot going on that front, but we're making great progress. I fully understand the importance of us getting a finance director on board as quickly as possible. Being so small, we absolutely need to make this a huge priority for the organization. That's all the updates I have. Chief?
No report.
No report.
Just a quick update that the Art Commission is planning an artist talk event on March 12th. So I will send you the invitation to that event, but we'll be hosting Joe Norman and Yoshi, who just donated the last piece that we acquired. Thanks.
Thank you. Did we already go? Nope. Director Word.
No report.
And no report.
All right. Well, I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn then. So moved. I assume there's no one opposed. All right, thank you.
You almost persuaded me.